And so we proceed to the backbench business. The backbench business debate is on hospice funding. I call Sally Ann Hart to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that this House consider the postcode lottery when it comes to funding for hospices and calls on integrated care boards to urgently address the funding for hospice-provided palliative care in their areas. As a member of the APPG for Hospice and End-of-Life Care, I'm very happy to be co-leading this debate with my lovely friend, the Honourable Member for Darlington, who applied for and moved this motion for debate today. I have so much admiration for hospice and palliative care providers and empathy for those experiencing dying, death and bereavement. Both my parents died of cancer, and I will always be grateful for the amazing care that they received. Hospice care is important to so many people, and we're very lucky to have St Michael's Hospice in beautiful Hastings and Rye, and Demelza House, which offers palliative care for children largely through outreach work. When the Honourable Member, I can't remember, was for Bromsgrove was Health Secretary, he announced the legal right to palliative care for all ages, and this was an amendment to the Health and Care Act which declared for the first time a duty for integrated care boards in England to commission palliative and end-of-life care that meets the needs and the demographic of the population it serves. I could not believe that end-of-life care was not already a legal right. We should all want to see the best support available for those people that are nearing the end of their lives as well as their families. And excellent palliative care, support for people mentally, physically and spiritually is vital. But the future, I will give way on that point.
I agree with everything that she said. I wanted to highlight the importance of palliative care for children and the amazing support that some children's hospices are able to provide, not just for the child, but actually for the entire family. It really is wraparound care and so important for those parents going through that bereavement process.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I couldn't agree more with him. He's absolutely right.
My honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, because she raises the point about why isn't it funded. In Southend we have the absolutely brilliant Havens Hospice, including a child's hospice, Little Havens. Over 80% of their funding comes from donations, so it's dependent on skydives and cycle rides, which is fantastic. But given we fund on the NHS the beginning of life with maternity care, doesn't she think we should be funding the end of life?
I do indeed think that that is the case, and I will be coming to that a little bit later on. The future of end-of-life care is uncertain as increasing costs and demands are putting huge pressures on hospices and care providers. And when it comes to the debate on assisted suicide, it's important that people feel confident that their end-of-life care will protect them from pain and suffering. Certainly we need increased funding. More resources are needed for end-of-life care services, including hospices, home care and palliative care teams. St Michael's Hospice, for example, costs around £7 million a year to run, and they receive about £2 million from the RICB, and the remaining £5 comes from the community in various forms. And like all hospices, St Michael's is heavily dependent on the generosity of local individuals, companies, groups and trusts. This funding model is uncertain and unsustainable and places hospitals under considerable strain. I will give way.
The Honourable Lady for giving way, and I congratulate her on this important debate. On the Honourable Member for Brent's point about children's hospices, I have the fantastic Shooting Star Children's Hospice in Hampton in my constituency, which serves a wide catchment area. And although she mentioned the statutory duty that was introduced by the government on ICBs to commission and fund palliative care, the problem is there's such huge variability. Surrey Heartlands, which is one of the ICBs that Shooting Star serves, only spends a paltry £39 per child, even though the average should be about £151, and other ICBs won't even disclose the amount. So does she agree with me that we need multi-year contracts with ICBs to serve these hospices?
Very good point.
Yeah.
Yes, I would praise my honourable friend for her intervention, and yes, I would agree with that, and coming to that later in my speech here. So, Demelza receives just 10% of its income from the Children's Hospice grant, which ends in March 2025, and just 4% of their income from spot purchases. So 86% of their income must come from fundraising. I'm concerned that neither the UK Government nor NHS England have set out whether the Children's Hospice grant, which is worth £25 million, will continue beyond 2024 to 25, and the grant is a vital source of funding for children's hospices. Dependence on the generosity of members of the public to pay for vital healthcare is not something that would be tolerated in other core areas of healthcare, such as maternity services, cancer care or A&E. Hospices are the only statutory service that rely on fundraising to keep going, despite end-of-life care being an essential service that so many of us will need.
Will she allow
This
me?
is made...
Will she allow me?
Yes.
What makes hospices so remarkable is their independence. And my fear is that the more one demands that they be funded by the state, that independence will be curtailed and questioned. And I think it's the member for Teddington who has put her finger on what I think is the difficulty, and that is the difference between the policies of different ICBs. And that's where the problem is. And were they funded centrally for the grants that are available, I think it would be much better, as they were during the pandemic.
Well, I would quite agree with my honourable friend. I think it's really important to point out that most hospices don't want 100% funding from the government because they need the flexibility to be able to do what they want. And fundraising is a really important part of the local community effort, bringing people together to help fundraising. But when the dependence on fundraising is so vast, that is where we might need to intervene to provide that extra funding. So, pressures of... Can you just give me one moment and I'll give way? So, end-of-life care is an essential service so many of us will need, but it's made worse by inflationary pressures and rising demand. We have an excellent ICB in Sussex, NHS Sussex, led by Adam Doyle, which has highlighted that hospices are recognised as having become increasingly fragile in recent years due to a lack of resilience in their funding model, which is heavily reliant on given and gifted income alongside NHS grants. I will give way.
On that point, Royal Trinity Hospice in my constituency supports people across central and southwest London to live and die well every single year. Next year it's going to cost them £90 million to deliver care for around the 2,500 patients and support the nearly 1,000 loved ones that they do. A 20% on-year increase. Meanwhile, the NHS funding they receive will decrease in real terms to 24% of the costs of running their services. So does the Honourable Member agree that the government should commit to maintaining the funding levels that hospices like Royal Trinity require to ensure that people receive the quality of end-of-life care and the dignified deaths that they deserve?
The honourable member for her intervention, and this is the point of the debate, to work out what sort of funding models we do need, but also ICBs need to be able to assess their priorities that they have in their local areas. They're given the freedom to do so, but I do take that on board. We have 8 hospices. Can I just carry on for a minute? We have 8 hospices across Sussex, and in 2019, 7 of them formed the Sussex Hospice Collaborative partnership working to help ensure the hospices' combined resources can be used to maximise their impact, reach and cost effectiveness of their activities. NHS Sussex works closely with this collaborative arrangement, which has supported the ability to have collective conversations. In January, the APPG on Hospice and End-of-Life Care published a report on government funding for hospices. The inquiry found that despite the introduction of a legal requirement for integrated care boards to commission palliative and end-of-life care, ICB commissioning of hospice services is currently not fit for purpose, and the value they provide to individuals and the wider health system is at risk. Hospice funding has historically not risen in line with inflation, which has been brought starkly to light during the periods of high inflation in recent years. Costs to keep palliative services running have increased rapidly over the past few years, but this is not reflected in the government funding hospices receive to deliver these services, which has increased by only 1% each year on average. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
And making an outstanding speech, and I congratulate her for bringing this to the House. St Mary's Hospice, St John's Hospice and Eden Valley Hospice, which serve the communities of Westmoreland, struggle like others from finding the funding they need to keep going. Of course, one of their issues is increased pay settlements in the NHS, which are good, but to compete and to get the staff and retain the staff within those hospices means that the hospices need to raise their pay to keep pace. Would she agree with me that one model may well be that rather than devolving it to the ICBs, who are not elected, not accountable directly to anybody, but the government through the National Health Service should fund at NHS pay rates, pay rises directly to all our hospices, so they're not worrying at least about that?
The Honourable Gentleman raises a valuable point, and I'm sure that is a point that the Minister will take on board. I will give way.
A, for her excellent speech, and B, because this is a really important debate. And I think she comes to the crux of the matter. And I would, is she aware that I would really be interested to hear from the Minister, because our Mountbatten Hospice in Newport and the Isle of Wight, it's much loved, one of the core institutions on the island. Their inflation costs in the last 2 years have been way above what they have been getting from the ICB. And our ICB is in special measures. We had 2 meetings with the ICB last week, very unclear about some of their long-term plans and how they're using the funding they have. And would she agree that really we need to make sure our ICBs are properly managed, properly run? I'm delighted she's got a great ICB. Us, it's a little bit more complicated, but we need to make sure that funding is going through to the hospices. So when there is the state element of funding, and one can debate about the very important nature of fundraising, actually the NHS money is getting through, because right now it doesn't seem to be.
Yeah.
And I absolutely feel it's unfortunate that your ICB is not brilliant or very good at all.
It's dreadful.
And
his ICB?
His ICB, yes, is not very good. Obviously, leadership, structure and a clear list of priorities is absolutely essential in order to deliver what the public needs. So, this significant funding challenges are particularly concerning in the context of increasing needs. Sue Ryder, a palliative and bereavement support charity, projects that demand for specialist palliative care service in England may rise by 55% from over the current decade, and this rise in demand is due to several factors, including increased mortality rates and a growing desire by patients to die at home rather than in hospital. It's clear we need a commitment from government to fund a much higher percentage of total palliative care costs than is currently done to ensure the sustainability of the hospice sector and the vital services that hospices provide in the medium term. ICBs cannot commission specialist services without the funding to do so. The APPG's report made a number of recommendations to government, the NHS and local authorities. On funding, the APPG recommended the government should produce a national plan to ensure the right funding flows to hospices and conduct or commission a piece of work to understand the costs of providing different models of palliative care and end-of-life care. And it also called for government funding to address immediate pressures of paying increased staffing costs for hospices, and said ICBs must ensure uplifts to hospice contracts which are equable with uplifts received by NHS-run services. I will give way.
Thank the Honourable Lady for Hastings and Rye for giving way. We have a hospice care centre in Belfast. It gives excellent work to those who have the Marie Curie who have cancer. But does the Honourable Lady agree as well? Well, it's very important to have the financial part in place, and without it can't go on. But it's also important to have the faith aspect of it as well, because many people who have to visit the hospice care are on their last journey. Ever mindful that the last journey is not in this world, but the next world is the one that matters. So I'm just asking the Honourable Lady, when it comes to ensuring that monies are available, does she also agree that faith is so important as well? And that faith care that Marie Curie hospice care given Belfast is an example of what we all need. Whatever your faith may be, Christianity or other religious aspects, it's really important to have something that looks after the hereafter.
And thank you, my honourable friend, for his intervention. And faith is very, very important for so many people. But also, if you don't have a faith, there is a spiritual aspect that needs to be looked after as well. So I know my honourable friend for Darlington will cover the report in more detail. Hospices need to be able to plan and invest in their services and develop and train specialist staff, so they need to know in advance how much funding they're getting. Hospices face training and recruitment issues, so worrying about being able to even provide an adequate service due to funding restraints should not be another one. My goddaughter is a young doctor who wants to specialise in palliative care, which is really remarkable for a young person, but we do need more young people. We need more medics, nurses and occupational therapists and so on in this growing area. And at least a 3-year funding cycle is required, as it would allow hospices and palliative care providers to plan accordingly. Finally, I'd like to conclude with a worrying Hospice UK statistic. They estimate that the end-of-life care sector is on track for a 77 million collective deficit for the financial year 23-24. This would represent the worst end-of-year figures for the sector in around 20 years of tracking. These losses are not sustainable, and our right to end-of-life care is now at risk unless immediate action is taken. Our hospices, palliative care and end-of-life services need to be properly funded. And could the Minister outline what steps she is taking to ensure that this happens? Thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper. Bambos, Charalambous.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I wish to thank the honourable members for Hastings and Ryan Darlington for securing this very important debate today. Hospices do incredible work. In communities across the country, hospices provide care to hundreds of thousands of people every year, providing essential palliative and end-of-life care. The service that hospices deliver are absolutely crucial to improving the quality of life for people in their final weeks and days, helping to provide a dignified, comfortable and compassionate end of life. This support is not just vital to people at the end of their lives, but also to their family and friends. End-of-life care impacts not just the patient, but all their loved ones, and the specialist support hospices provide patients in their final stages of life and their families who are watching them pass away without suffering or pain is immeasurable. And that is why hospices are so important. In my constituency of Enfield Southgate, we're lucky to have a facility of the incredible North London Hospice, which has been caring for people since 1984. Their health and wellbeing centre in Barrywell Green helps to enable the best of life at the end of life for people across the boroughs of Enfield, Haringey and Barnet, providing tailored care, including physical, emotional, spiritual wellbeing and bereavement support for patients, friends, carers and loved ones. And I must also mention the wonderful North London Hospice Photography Club, who also support each other and take amazing pictures which they sell to raise funds for the hospice. I remember hearing from a constituent of mine, Joy Watkins, who was receiving care and support at the hospice. Joy has sadly passed away now, but her words about the importance of the hospice and the care she received were incredibly moving. Joy spoke about going to something called a death cafe, which is an informal space for people to talk about end of life, to share their concerns and listen to others express their thoughts, hopes and experiences of death. She said that going to the Death Cafe enabled her to make choices about the end of her life. She could make choices about who to spend time with and about the finances she would make use of at the end of her life. It transformed the way in which she viewed and handled the end of her life. The way we talk and approach dying matters, and Joy's words have really stuck with me. Indeed, it was one of the reasons that motivated me to introduce my private member's bill back in 2018 on the provision of comprehensive palliative care. And I know that next month Hospice UK will be promoting their campaign for Dying Matters Awareness Week, and I look forward to supporting their efforts on what is a really important initiative. Being honest, timely conversations about death and dying are essential to good end-of-life care. Yet all too often, barriers including lack of confidence, taboos around discussing death and confusion about who should be having these conversations mean patients, carers and families may not understand what is happening or not get all the information and support they need. And that's where hospices and their brilliant staff come in. More recently, a close family member of mine received support from North London Hospice, and although Gabby sadly passed away, I'm so grateful for their specialist care. Mr Deputy Speaker, yesterday I and about a dozen honourable members ran the London Marathon, and I was proud to do so to raise money for North London Hospice. What was striking when pounding the streets of London in such a wonderful festival of community yesterday was seeing how many runners, like me, were also raising money for their local hospices, and this demonstrates the sad reality of the inadequate central funding for hospices. Since I was first elected, I've been trying to bang the drum for North London Hospice, and although it took me a few years to muster the courage to put on the running vest and put my knees on the line, it does feel like as each year passes, the challenges facing hospices grow greater and more acute. As we know, hospices are an integral part of our health and social care system. They work in partnership with local health and care systems, helping to reduce the pressure on our NHS by caring for patients who would otherwise be directly supported by NHS services. And as a community, we're reliant on hospices, and they are important parts of the community that they serve. But hospices are also reliant on us for support too, through fundraising and donations, as they are largely charitably funded. On average, around 2/3 of adult hospices' income is raised through fundraising, such as charity shops and marathons. The figure is higher for children's hospices, which must raise around 4/5 of their income. I give way to the Honourable Member.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way. On children's hospices, the shooting star in my constituency, which I've already mentioned, is very grateful that the Minister who's sitting on the bench at the moment has indeed committed for 2024-2025 the children's hospice grant that does come centrally from NHS England. The problem is that's a sort of year-to-year commitment which really doesn't help hospices like Shooting Star to be able to plan for the long term. So does he agree with me that there should be a ring fence placed around that funding and it should be pegged to inflation year on year so that children's hospices can plan properly?
The Honourable Member makes an excellent point. Long-term funding is absolutely essential for hospices, particularly children's hospices, to be able to project into the future what they need to do and how to plan ahead. So she makes an excellent point there. So I know, for example, that North London Hospice are reliant on donations from the community each year to fill their 10 million funding gap, as only a small proportion of their costs are funded by the NHS. Of course, the cost of living crisis continues to eat away at people's finances, and this directly impacts on our community's ability to provide the vital charitable support that hospices rely on. With the current state of hospice funding, the reality is that hospices are struggling to keep up with inflation and rising costs, and this is leading to services being cut. But demand for palliative care continues to grow. For North London Hospice, it has grown at a rate of 5% year on year. Costs of running hospice services also continue to rise rapidly, for example with energy bills and the cost of paying staff a fair wage. Hospices recruit from the small pool of staff as the NHS and care sector. However, they're not provided with the same government funding to meet NHS pay levels, and this means that many hospice staff are doing the same jobs as their NHS colleagues but being paid less for it. As a result, Hospice UK's figures suggest an 11% growth in payroll costs this year, which means around 130 million of additional spending, which is not met by increased statutory funding. As mentioned, these costs are not met with additional uplifts from NHS funding or contracts, and despite a legal requirement for integrated care boards to commission palliative care services that meet the needs of local population, the funding hospices receive from ICBs varies significantly across the country and means charitable donations make up much of their income. I give way.
Thank you for giving way. As a former hospice fundraiser myself, what I did before I came here, I'm grateful for the Honourable Member to bring the debate. Part of the problem that I saw and I faced firsthand was that with pay rise and inflation, I was going out to private companies, trusts and foundations to increase pay within inflation, often finding that the hardest thing to fundraise for. The ICB was never very forthcoming in doing that, particularly when we would be entering into conversations with the ICB the year prior to the year being funded. So,
my honourable friend makes an excellent point. It's hard enough to fundraise, but when you're fundraising for inflationary costs, that makes it much, much harder for fundraisers to do an excellent job for all our hospices and actually bring such an enormous amount of money together to make sure the hospices are run sufficiently adequately. Therefore, many hospices like North London Hospice will be continuing to operate a deficit budget for 2024-25, with shortfall being met from reserves. Indeed, Hospice UK estimates that the sector is on track for a 77 million collective deficit for the financial year 2023-24. These are the worst end-of-year figures in around 20 years of tracking. This funding model is simply unsustainable. It will undoubtedly lead to hospices cutting back essential services for patients, and this is becoming increasingly urgent. We need to look at how hospices are funded in this country. The essential support they provide should not just be a voluntary service that is topped up by whatever fundraising is available. This is an integral part of our healthcare system, reliant on charitable donations. No other services are funded in this way, and it's unthinkable, for example, that maternity services will be left up to charities to plug shortfalls. So why is end-of-life care reliant on the kindness of strangers? It is really worrying, and I believe that we need to look at delivering a far more secure long-term model of funding that protects our hospices and partners them with the wider health and care system, because if we do not properly support our hospices, we're in danger of losing them. But I give way to the Honourable Member.
Well, funding models are different across the UK. I wonder if he agrees with me, because you raised a point I have a bit of a concern with. The vast majority of hospices, like the two in mine, one of which is the largest and oldest in Scotland, St Margaret's of Scotland, the voluntary capacity of the Board of Management has allowed it to develop and, of course, increase its palliative care provision. Does he maybe agree that maybe what we should be looking at is a parity of esteem between the voluntary hospice sector and our differing NHS structures to have that equity of approach and investment?
The Honourable Member makes an excellent point. I think we do need to look at what models work best for each different region. I don't know about the model that he's particularly talking about there, but I think we need to explore, we need to look at the long-term funding of hospices and what models work best for each particular hospice and each particular region. But he makes an excellent point there. I'm pleased that today's debate has shown that the strength of feeling on this issue and that members have rightly highlighted the need for greater support and funding for hospices in the UK, and that's clear from the excellent speech that the Honourable Member made, as well as the interventions that have been made so far today. And I look forward to hearing from the Minister on the Government's response to the challenges that have been outlined. And finally, I'd like to once again thank everyone at North London Hospice for all their amazing work in my community and beyond, and also thank Hospice UK for all their advocacy on these issues and for their excellent briefings ahead of today's debate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Peter Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Gentleman for Enfield Southgate. Great to see him here after his performance yesterday in the London Marathon. I congratulate him on completing that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is a pleasure to be called to speak in this long-awaited debate, and I want to place on the record my thanks and congratulations to my honourable friend from Hastings and Rye for moving the motion. Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the outset, I want to put on the record my thanks to hospices around the country who have engaged with me in preparing for today's debate. And I want to thank the Hospice UK team, Toby, Katie and Olivia in particular, for their ongoing support to me and to the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Hospices and End-of-Life Care, which I co-chair along with Baroness Finlay of Llandaff. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish to draw the House's attention to my register of interests as a trustee of North Yorkshire Hospice Care, which operates both Heriot Hospice Home Care and St Michael's Hospice in Harrogate. I've served as a trustee of this hospice for over a decade and have seen the difficulties that the piecemeal commissioning causes to our precious hospices. To my mind, this debate is not simply about asking the government for more money. We know that there are serious public financial challenges post-pandemic. But this is an opportunity on the floor of the House to discuss solutions for the challenges our hospices face. And I must record my grateful thanks to the Backbench Business Committee for allowing us to have this debate. Seeing the number of members wishing to speak in support of their local hospices today is testament to how much value each and every one of our communities have for their local hospices. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a matter of life and death. The hospice movement is there to deliver good deaths. Now that might seem a strange thing to say, but palliative care delivered in the right environment, be that in a hospice, a children's hospice, or indeed in a person's own home with a hospice at home service, is a truly wonderful thing. Those precious final few weeks of a person's life are imprinted into our memories, and it is right that those who are dying and those who are loving, supporting and caring for them do so in an environment which is properly funded, commissioned, and which is capable of being able to plan and prepare now and into the future for that continuing care.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I'd be happy to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for his contribution and the previous contributions, both of which have focused to some extent on palliative care and end-of-life care. I have two hospices that serve my constituency, St Andrews in Grimsby and Lindsay Lodge in Scunthorpe, and they provide an excellent end-of-life environment. Would you agree with me that if we are to diffuse the sort of movement towards encouraging assisted dying, we do need to ensure that our hospices provide a service that, as an alternative to those who seem to be moving towards assisted dying as an answer?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his intervention. I have my own personal views about assisted dying, and I'm sure in the fullness of time this House will have a debate on that. This debate is not about assisted dying. This is about our hospices and how we fund and support them. And with the greatest of respect to my honourable friend, conflating the two issues is not helpful. Mr. Deputy Speaker, even post-death, our wonderful hospice movement provides much needed bereavement care to those who have suffered the loss of a loved one. The Health and Social Care Act 2021 makes provision for the very first time for the commissioning of palliative care. That in itself is a landmark. Integrated care boards around the country now have the responsibility to commission palliative care to meet the needs of the community they serve, which is a good thing, ensuring that local commissioners working together with local providers and local representatives can deliver the palliative care needs of their respective communities. I will happily give way.
Thank you. It's a timely debate. The Select Committee tomorrow morning will have one of its topical sessions on hospice care. Now, I have Naomi House and Jack's Place Hospice in my Winchester constituency, and he said ICBs, plural. The trouble that they have, on top of all of the rising costs and inflation pressures that are on them at the moment, is that they're negotiating for the same level of grant with 6 ICBs. And I wonder when he comes to summarise the recommendations from his excellent all-party group, whether he would recognise that challenge that many hospices face across multiple commissioning bodies.
I'm very grateful to the Chairman of the Select Committee for his intervention, and I'm grateful for his continuing engagement with me on this really important topic. And he raises a really important issue. And as I will come on to in my speech, this is not just simply about each individual ICB meeting its own challenges. This is something that needs national and the government's attention in order to resolve. Mr. Deputy Speaker, what we have seen is a very mixed and patchwork picture across the country. During COVID, the government stepped up to the plate, acted decisively and provided much needed financial support to the hospice movement, which not only prevented many hospices failing and collapsing, but ensured that much needed palliative care continue to be delivered around the country. The picture today, however, is one of immense challenges for our hospices. Many have failed to receive an increased level of support under their existing contracts with ICBs to meet rising costs of energy or staffing. This is at the same time as our hospitals face increased pressure for beds. It is a fact that one night in a hospice costs less than a bed night in a hospital. And whilst there are reasons why a person might need to remain in hospital, better palliative care can be delivered in the more appropriate surroundings of a hospice. Just last week, I met with the Chief Executive of Sue Ryder, Heidi Travis, who also serves as a Commissioner for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough ICB. It was interesting to learn that work is being undertaken to explore ways in which hospices can do more, either with the same level of funding or indeed in some cases less, but in order to explore those creative new ways of delivering hospice care, either through hospice at home models or through virtual wards. Full and frank conversations need to be had between hospices and their integrated care boards to truly explore the art of the possible. Mr Deputy Speaker, in the Tees Valley, I have been pleased to be able to bring together St Teresa's in Darlington, Alice House in Hartlepool, Butterwick Hospice in Stockton and Teesside Hospice in Middlesbrough on multiple occasions, collectively working with all 8 members of Parliament covering the Tees Valley to share a collective voice for the region, so that we can be a beacon of excellence in the provision of palliative care in the North East. Whilst the levels of uplift in funding for these 4 hospices from the North East and North Cumbria Integrated Care Board is simply not enough, the very fact that we are working together, they are working together, and they are meeting with the ICB is a sign of improving relations, and there is hope for the future. I do just wish to touch on the work of our children's hospices, which has already been mentioned by a number of members. They are an integral part of palliative care across the country, and I'm grateful for the engagement that I've had in recent weeks and months with Together for Short Lives. The NHS Children's Hospice grant of £25 million is indeed gratefully received by the sector from government. However, it should be guaranteed for a minimum of 3 years to enable those hospices to be able to be properly plan and commission their services, and it should be uprated in line with inflation each year. Furthermore, it must be ring-fenced so that where that money is passed through regional ICBs, the entirety of that money flows to the front line of those children's hospices. And I would specifically ask the Minister in her summing up if she can specifically address that point. Mr Deputy Speaker, in preparing for today's debate, I asked for information and evidence from Hospice UK in respect of hospices in each of the 4 nations of our country. St Michael's, the hospice of which I'm a trustee, is the local hospice care charity supporting people affected by terminal illness and bereavement across Harrogate. Each year, the vital care they provide will cost almost £6 million to deliver, of which just 17% is funded by the government, which equates to a little over £1 million of their total running costs. This leaves over £5 million to be raised through the generosity of their supporters and community. The rise in inflation has brought additional strain on their finances, which has been met with just a 1.2% funding increase from the ICB. Charalambous House in Pembrokeshire needs to raise around £288,000 to keep running. This is equal to £24,000 per month. They only receive £5,000 per month from their health board. This amount has been halved in the last 5 years from £10,000. They have not received an uplift for at least the last 4 years. They anticipate that funding ending in September 2024, when the new commissioning model in Wales comes into effect. Without a cash injection, they are in danger of closing within the next 12 months, as their reserves are low. Whilst Charalambous House is small, the impact on the community, like all hospices, is huge. In Scotland, Ardgowan in Inverclyde, who, despite a very generous community, are facing a deficit of £100,000. They expect this to rise to £172,000 for the next financial year. In the last 18 months, they have seen utility costs rise by 67% and insurance costs by 10%. They need to see increased support. And in Northern Ireland, Foyle Hospice in Londonderry, 65% of their funding comes purely from fundraising. They are unable to plan ahead or reconfigure services because of the uncertainty over statutory funding, including the outcome of the recent Day Hospice review. They have received some non-recurrent funding through the Cancer Charities Relief Fund, but may be unable to provide these highly valuable services when that funding runs out in March 2025. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are a compassionate and wealthy country. We have a National Health Service which, despite some of its challenges, do incredible things, but so too do our hospices, be they based in buildings or in patients' homes. Our hospices really must be seen as an integral part of our National Health Service. Philanthropy and charitable... I will happily give way.
Very grateful. I may be able to push on the point that I made to the Honourable Member for Enfield earlier on, because I've heard this notion of symbiance with the NHS, and they're very two distinct approaches to care. From my perspective, the palliative care sector at its best is because it's run as a voluntary local body, and I'm wondering if you maybe expand a wee bit more what he means by that kind of convergence with the NHS, because there is a fear in the voluntary hospice sector that what they have done to push palliative care forward could be held back by a more physical integration with the NHS.
Member continues. Just to remind everybody, there's quite a bit of interest in this debate, and so if we could look to ensure that self-discipline as far as the length of speeches is concerned would be very helpful. Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very grateful to the intervention from the Honourable Gentleman, and he raises some really important points which I'm not really sure I've got time now to go into in some detail, but I think if the government is going to give the National Health Service enough money to increase the wages of everybody in the National Health Service, and the integrated care boards are commissioning services from hospices around the country, the very least those hospices can expect is a minimum uplift equal so that they can maintain parity of wages. Our hospices are not seeking to be nationalised. They cherish their independence. They cherish their independence passionately, and it is because of their independence that they are so integrated in our community. But if we are going to rely upon them to provide services, the least we can do as a society is meet the cost of those services that we are expecting them to provide. Mr Deputy Speaker, mindful of your words, I will bring my conclusion remarks to a close in a moment. Philanthropy and charitable giving have been the foundations upon which our wonderful hospice movement have been established. To my mind, their charitable status has enabled them to be flexible and develop outside of the NHS as a holistic pattern of palliative care. However, in the 21st century, it cannot be acceptable that funding is reliant on pensioners performing skydives, communities baking cakes to fund palliative care. Much work has been done, much work must be done by our ICBs and the government to map the demands and needs for palliative care across the country. And we must end this postcode-based patchwork of provision. It really is time that the government established a rapid task force to collaborate with the entire hospice movement and our integrated care boards to ensure that as a nation we have the best provision in palliative care to ensure everybody can have a good and peaceful death.
Thank you very much. Colleen Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable members for Hastings and Rye and Darlington and the APPG for securing this hugely important debate on the floor of this House. In Coventry, we are extremely lucky to have Myton Hospice, Like other hospices across the country, Myton is a critical part of the healthcare system and plays a vital role in providing care for people from the point at which their illness is diagnosed as terminal to the end of their life, while also supporting the needs of their families. The services that Myton provides are a crucial part of the palliative and end-of-life care in Coventry. The work that they do and the services they provide not only ease pressure on the wider health and care system in our city, but they also ensure patients receive exactly the care that they need, when and where they need it. Without Myton, patients might find themselves unnecessarily relying on A&E or other hospital departments, which would massively increase the burden on and costs for the NHS. I know firsthand how important Myton is to our city and local communities, as my husband Ian received end-of-life care there. Diagnosed with leukemia in 2014, he had a stem cell transplant and was fighting his way back to reasonably good health when 3 years later he became ill with an aggressive secondary cancer and was diagnosed as terminally ill in 2018. He wanted to die at home, but we were advised that domiciliary end-of-life care was clunky. Not my words, but the words of the NHS care team who were advising and talking to us. This meant that we could not be sure of a timely home visit if he needed more pain relief. And he was on a lot of pain relief. He was on a pain driver. I got liquid morphine that I could give him, but that shot that only a nurse, a district nurse, could give him might not be there immediately. He may have to wait an hour or 2 hours for the nurse to come. He decided to go into Myton Hospice, which actually is only a stone throw away from where we lived, so it's sort of very, very local to us. So he went into Myton Hospice and I stayed with him until he passed peacefully away just 1 week later. It was a tranquil, respectful place where all his needs were met, and ours. We were grateful for that real quality time together. Just before Christmas, I went to an event at Myton Hospice where I met with staff and the loved ones of those who had received palliative and end-of-life care there, and the people who helped fundraise to ensure Myton can continue to provide their vital services. It takes just moments when speaking with people at such an event to not only understand the importance of the hospice sector, but also to recognise the huge funding challenges that it faces. We know the hospice sector's reliance on fundraising for much of its income brings with it significant risks, and those risks have been compounded in recent years, first by the pandemic and now by the cost of living crisis. As a result, the hospice sector is facing a perfect storm, with the cost of delivering their services increasing while charitable donations are volatile, and NHS funding is falling in real terms. Take Myton Hospices as an example. Just 20% of their funding comes from the NHS, and in real terms this is decreasing every year. This comes at a time when their costs are consistently increasing year on year. For the financial year 24 to 25, their running costs will be £14.3 million, and they will need to raise £11 million of that in voluntary income, compared to running costs of £13.25 million and raised voluntary income of £10.5 million last year. These funding challenges inevitably increase pressure on and access to services. I know that more people need a hospice bed more than ever before, with demand for beds at Myton having increased by 25% over the last year. As a result, over 70% of people accepted for a bed at Myton will not be able to access one straight away and will have to join a waiting list. Sadly, 3 out of 4 people waiting for a Myton bed will die before they can access one. While I understand the funding pressures that Coventry and Warwickshire Integrated Care Board are operating under, this certainly raises questions over whether they are meeting the requirement to commission palliative and end-of-life care to meet their population's needs. Indeed, I know that with funding for just 4 more nurses, Myton could open 8 more beds and eliminate their waiting list completely, ensuring everyone in Coventry and Warwickshire gets the palliative and end-of-life care they need and they deserve. These funding challenges are certainly not unique to Myton. Most, if not all, hospices are facing similar problems. This needs to change if we are to ensure that the demand for hospice care, both in their inpatient units and in the community, is met and eliminate the inequality and postcode lottery of services. We need hospice funding to be sufficient, resilient and sustainable. I asked Myton Hospice what steps they believe need to be taken to ensure we have a thriving hospice sector with long-term sustainability at its heart. They told me they believe there needs to be a tariff-based approach to funding that reflects the core services provided, so that funding is based on what each hospice provides against clear criteria. They also felt that essential hospice services, including doctors and nurses, should be funded by the NHS. We must ensure that all patients with a terminal illness receive the right care to meet their needs, that this care is delivered with dignity, respect and compassion, and that the end of their life is valued as much as at the beginning. To achieve this, hospices must be funded fairly and sustainably.
Will Quince. Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, the Member for Coventry North East, and what was a very powerful speech. I'd also like to thank my honourable friends, the members for Hastings and Rye and Darlington, for tabling such an important debate, and to just pay tribute to my honourable friend, the Minister, who I know is an excellent Minister. I enjoyed working with very closely at the Department. I know will listen very carefully and act where she can on the issues raised during this debate. Hospices play a vital role in local communities and, of course, within the wider health and care system, providing care to those at the end of their lives and support and comfort to their loved ones. And St Helena Hospice in my own constituency of Colchester is no different. Since its opening on the 20th of May 1985, St Helena has supported countless families in and around Colchester and North Essex during their most difficult of times. However, over the past 2 years, it has been more challenging for them to carry out their vital work. St Helena has averaged a deficit of £1 million per year over the past 2 years due to rising demand, increasing costs and real terms cuts to their NHS funding. Very similar to colleagues who have already spoken, only 27% of St Helena's Hospice income comes from our NHS. That means 73% of the income needed to run St Helena is raised through the local community. And this income stream, as is common unfortunately across the country, has faced its own difficulties due to the increased cost of living. East Anglia's Children's Hospice also plays a hugely important role in caring for families and children in my local area. And during 22-23, they cared for 532 life-threatened babies, children and young people, and delivered more than 72,000 hours of care and wellbeing support for families. However, every year each faces the ongoing challenge of generating 85% of their income from non-statutory sources. So they receive only 15% of their income from the NHS and local authorities, about £2.7 million, mainly on a year-by-year basis via grants and zero-based contracts. And having seen first-hand the impact that hospices have on local communities and the fondness which St Helena and each
are thought of in Colchester and more widely in our region, it is essential that hospices all over our country are not allowed to fail, not only because the outcomes for patients will be arguably worse, but also because, as the recent Sue Ryder report shows, adequate funding for hospices is more cost-effective than replacing services with the NHS. Now, as a former health minister, I just wanted to urge some caution in calling for national solutions or commissioning. Of course, we should look at postcode lotteries wherever they exist, but in doing so, we have to remember that every area is different. The needs of our populations are different. Hospice provision in and of itself is different in every one of our constituencies. And ICBs were set up to make local, holistic, system-wide decisions based on their population needs and priorities, always putting at their heart the needs and the outcomes of patients, but also looking at system costs, so there isn't that silo mentality in working, and of course, ultimately, what's in the best interest in terms of outcomes, but also value for money for our NHS and the taxpayer. Having said that, Mr Deputy Speaker, I do think that there needs to be more consistent commissioning, and ICB should commission against service specification. In conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a more general observation about death. We are not very good about talking about death. The government has, in my view, a role to play in this. Notwithstanding what I said about ICBs, I think there is a national role here. And I would like to see the government support a population approach to end-of-life care. So supporting more people to be involved in their care planning, promoting choice and dignity, and of course supporting alongside that community care. Now, we know that many people would rather spend their last days at home and around their loved ones and their pets and their families and not die in hospital if possible. But supporting hospices and community services is a way of helping to keep people at home if this is their preference, meaning not just better outcomes for patients, but also ultimately better value for our NHS and the taxpayer. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd just like to close by thanking all those at St Helena Hospice and each for the amazing work that they do.
Paulette Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thanks to the member for Hastings and Rye and Darlington for securing an absolutely excellent and important debate. We think of hospices as places where people go to die, but they aren't. They're places where people go to live comfortably, supported and cared for while they are ill, until that moment of death, and beyond for many of the families. I might not be the only MP in the chamber for whom this debate has made me remember my mortality, but I think we would all agree that when we come to that time, we want to be looked after by kind, supportive staff who can give us the care and attention we need. Those staff should be able to look after patients and their families without worrying about how they're going to feed their own children. Rooms should be warm, and the directors of the hospices should be thinking about how can they support as many people as possible, not about when they are going to have to switch off the heating or turn someone away. Hospices across the UK provide care and support to 300,000 people every year and are absolutely vital to our health and social care system. Unfortunately, they are facing serious financial challenges and it's now become a postcode lottery for many of our constituents. I'll happily give way. Thank you.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and listening to her impassioned speech and the experience that she brings to this House is valuable. The brilliant Keach Hospice serves so many in Luton North, and they do amazing work, not just in end-of-life care, but also vital bereavement support for everyone, including children. In the last year alone, Keach's energy costs have increased by £250,000. This, combined with the cost of living crisis, puts financial pressures on fundraising, which makes up 2/3 of their total funding. So does my honourable friend agree with me and others that we need sustainable funding models for hospice care, and failure to provide that risks much needed services in the future?
Thank you for that intervention. I absolutely agree with what the Honourable Member has said. We absolutely need that, and as I go through my speech, I shall be agreeing with what you have just said. Thank you. The John Taylor Hospice in my constituency, which is run by Birmingham Hospice, does unbelievably important work to support my constituents and their families in Erdington, King's Standing and Castle Vale. The staff work day and night to make sure people are cared for while they are ill, and I couldn't be prouder to support them in this chamber today. And I must add that I've actually worked there in the past. Birmingham Hospice care for almost 1,000 local people with a life-limiting illness every day, and last year it cost them over 16 million to run their services, 40% of which needs to be recovered by fundraising income. Over the last few years, the hospice has seen a significant increase in costs, including the price of energy, food and vital medicines, and a shortfall in the funding for staff pay awards. At the same time, fundraising has declined across the hospice sector, with the cost of living crisis hitting poorer areas like mine the hardest. Birmingham Hospice is currently losing £200,000 a month, with inflationary costs and falling voluntary income. The only option they have to keep the hospice going is to reduce the services they provide. A reduced service will increase inequality across our city of Birmingham and across the country, where sadly more people will die in hospital or A&E as a result, when they could have had outstanding care at the hospice and or at home with the support of the community team. The hospice is dedicated to ensuring that outstanding care at the end of life is available to all, but they have recently been in a difficult position of having to make essential staff redundant in order to maintain financial security. And this isn't just happening in Birmingham. Nationally, Hospice UK estimates that 100,000 people in the UK who could benefit from palliative care die without receiving it each year. Hospices play a huge role in alleviating pressure on our NHS, and I do not have the ability to reset their budgets on the 1st of April each year, as the NHS does. Instead, their deficits continue, and the very valuable care they provide to local communities like mine is at risk of being lost. I have worked in the health service all my adult life. When we speak about hospices, we very rarely mention the vitally important role they play in providing respite care and support and the family of someone support to the family of someone who's ill. I'm happy to interview.
Thank you for your contribution. It's wonderful. The part you call the debate. Many people want to stay at home. I've stayed with 4 people right through to the death at home. But hospices give a different care than hospitals. If you go into hospital, you might not get into the hospice. We have 10 beds in the most beautiful hospice. It funds 71% from charitable donations. Not donations, fundraising. But if you're not in a hospice and you've not got the care at home, not everybody can do it at home. You've not got the families to do it, and you cannot always provide the care they need. You can end in the hospital for hours. Do you find that in your areas? You can get triage in an ambulance outside the hospital. You don't get the palliative care, you don't get the support, the families don't get the support. It is a completely different service. Do you agree we should be looking for more hospice care, not less? But we shouldn't be changing it to a hospital ward. It's a different atmosphere in a hospice. Do you find that is the case? It's not decrying the hospitals. Hospital isn't somewhere to die.
Paulette Hamilton.
Absolutely agree with your sentiments and your statement. As was said by one of the honourable members, I can't remember earlier, we need to look at population health. We need to move away from individuals and look at population health and how will we support that local community. Now I will move on swiftly so I can finish. I have worked in the health Sorry, let me start again. My constituents is the 5th poorest in the UK, and our communities are in some of the UK's so-called left-behind neighbourhoods. For places like mine, respite care is so important to make sure carers get the break and support they need to keep them doing the incredible work they do. I am a nurse, and it breaks my heart that the NHS is in the worst state it has ever been. Throughout the 14 years of this Tory government, I have seen doctors striking, nurses striking, technicians striking, people queuing around the block for a GP appointment, people pulling out their own teeth, the highest waiting times in history, and a complete disdain for the service that is quite literally serves us from birth to death. We must have a national care service. We must properly invest in our NHS. It is no longer acceptable for hospices to rely on charitable donations to try and survive. Now more than ever, our hospices and our NHS need a Labour government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just to gently remind the House as well that when you use the word you, you're referring to me. And so please try and resist. Damien Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, and I congratulate my honourable friends from Hastings and Rye and Darlington for securing this debate. I foremost wish to highlight the significant challenges and opportunities before us across the United Kingdom within the care sector. In Southport, Queen's Course Hospice stands as a pillar of community strength. From its Star Trek night walks, which have raised nearly £100,000, to the annual Christmas fairs and summer balls, and who could forget the annual Santa Sprint that unite our community in support of their services, Queen Court initiatives are absolutely vital. It was a privilege to visit Queen's Court Hospice in 2022 and meet with the dedicated nursing operations and fundraising teams. I found their passion and commitment to serving Southport and the surrounding areas truly inspiring, and I am committed to supporting their invaluable work in Southport. It is clear that the hard work of Debbie Pearce-Lloyd and her team is paying off in Southport and is testament to the hospice's embedded role in our community. Similarly, my visit to Clare House Children's Hospice a few years ago also highlighted the immense dedication and heartfelt contribution made by staff and volunteers. Their commitment to providing care for every child is truly commendable. Their work brings indispensable comfort to affected children and their families during unimaginably difficult times. Yet despite these immense and inspiring local efforts, the recent Hospice UK briefing projects a £77 million deficit across the hospice sector for 2023-2024. Queen's Court Hospice, which needs nearly £3 million to operate each year, only receives 20% of this amount and has to raise the remaining amount through exceptionally hard-raising fundraising. This figure is not merely a statistic, but a stark indication of the financial hurdles facing our hospice care system. Hospices are cornerstones of our healthcare system, offering invaluable support to over 300,000 individuals annually. This support extends beyond patient care, providing relief and assistance to families during the most challenging times. The remarkable efforts in fundraising by hospices underscore the community's recognition of their vital role. However, the sector's reliance on charitable income highlights the need for a more structured approach to funding. It is heartening to see the government's commitment to palliative care, notably through the Health and Social Care Act 2022, which introduces a legal duty for integrated care boards to commission palliative care services. This is a positive step forward, ensuring that the needs of the local population are met. Nevertheless, despite these strides, the variability in funding across the country and the escalating operational costs represent ongoing challenges. I'm proud of our government's record in supporting hospices and the broader NHS. However, I recognise that the demand for palliative care increases. We must continue to evolve and support the system to ensure it can be sustainable for the future. The anticipated growth in palliative care needs by an estimated 130,000 additional deaths annually by 2040 underscores the urgency for developing a sustainable funding model. Such a model would empower hospices to continue their work in partnership with the NHS, providing compassionate care and support. Therefore, Mr Deputy Speaker, I participate in today's debate. I firmly believe in the government's ability to address these challenges, and I hope to hear that commitment from the Minister when she winds up this debate today. By fostering a collaborative approach with the hospice sector, we can ensure hospices in Southport and across the United Kingdom are not just sustained, but are supported to continue to provide the vital and critical services to those that need them.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I welcome this debate because it allows us to pay tribute to the wonderful work that hospices do in many of all of our constituencies around the country, but at the same time raising the peril that some of them are in, the insecurity that they are facing, and the fragile nature of the funding that they have. Mindful of your caveat on time, I will just make 2 points, if I may. First is in relation to adult services for my constituents. These have been provided for many years by the Pembridge Palliative Care Unit, which is an adult community-based specialist palliative care unit just over the border in North Kent, and it is a fantastic place, and I've visited friends who have been dying there, and I'm aware of the wide range of services they have. It isn't just, or it wasn't just inpatient care, it's also telephone advice, it's also community care nursing and therapy teams. And it did have, as I say, a wonderful inpatient unit. Unfortunately, it doesn't at the moment. And the ICB is consulting on various options, some of which would see that unit reopen. It closed, allegedly not because of funding, but because the consultant left and they were unable to recruit a consultant to fill that post. Well, I'd have some sympathy with that, were it not that the fact that it closed in 2018, and we are still waiting for the NHS to provide that service and to enable us to reopen that service, which is exactly what all of my constituents want. And I note in the latest consultation, in which there are options to reopen, the NHS says, we've heard there is still a strong desire for the Pembridge inpatient unit to be reopened. The options from the public for how we could reopen the unit could be more widely considered than they have been to date. But I think that's putting it somewhat mildly. It is an indication, I think, of the parlour state that some services are in around the country, despite the hugely high quality that they've provided. The other issue I want to raise is in relation to children's hospice services. And those for my constituency, or in fact for the whole ICB in North West London, which is a population of 2 million people, comes from Shooting Star Children's Hospices, which we've already heard mentioned by old lady for Twickenham, because it's based in her constituency. And they wrote to me recently and said they supported 700 families living across Surrey, South West London and North West London, that their specialist care and support are completely free of charge to families and available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and includes specialist nursing in the community, symptom management and pain relief, overnight respite stays, end-of-life care, specialist bereavement care, and a comprehensive range of therapies, groups and clinics for the whole family. the majority of their funding, we've heard this from all members on both sides this evening, are funded through fundraising. Approximately a third is funded from statutory channels, but for each pound received from statutory channels necessitates the raising of 2 additional pounds to sustain service. And I honestly can't imagine this happening in many other areas. I mean, there are some other examples of charitable funding, such as air ambulance, but it's not the norm, I'm pleased to say, in the health service. And the plea that they make is for properly funded paediatric palliative care across the UK, which creates a level playing field in terms of funding. And I ask, what is possibly unreasonable about that request, or I would rather say demand? So on the back of that request, I attended, as I think a number of members here will have done, the recent reception which there was here, or recent meeting that there was here, organised by Together for Short Lives. And I was incredibly impressed by that. I met the Chief Executive of Shooting Stars, Paul Farthing, at that meeting, and at his request I've now written to the head of my local ICB, making a request in the first instance simply that they meet and discuss and get to know the services that are better offered. Because I think one of the problems with the majority of funding coming from the voluntary sector or through fundraising, and I understand the reasons why that is important, and we want it to continue, and it renews those links with the community, but it means there is less of a connection than there would be in other respects with the statutory sector. And I think that the ICBs need to work very closely with their local hospices, even if they're not, as in my case, based in the same geographical area. And they jointly need to have a plan for how to go to government and how to persuade government that we have to have stable and ongoing funding lasting more than 1 year, covering all the services and the impressive range of services that I've already mentioned, and that without that, then a lot of services like Pembridge are going to be in doubt as we go forward. Hospices have, somebody mentioned earlier on the issue, but this is not a debate, we're having a debate next week about assisted dying. The two things are related, but they are also separate. What we want is the most compassionate and the clearest services for people at the end of life that we can have. Part of that is ensuring properly funded hospice services, whether it's for adults or for children. And I thank again the organisers of this debate for bringing this matter to the House's attention, and I hope the government's listening.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I firstly congratulate my honourable friends, the member for Hastings and Rye, for starting the debate, and to my honourable friend, the member for Darlington, on their hard work in sponsoring this debate and for their work on the all-party group. Mr Deputy Speaker, I hosted a Westminster Hall debate on the 14th of June 2023, and I'm pleased that we're having this debate this evening, although disappointed that no further progress has been made on some of the problems that we expressed then compared to the problems that many honourable members are expressing this evening. The hospice sector, as has already been said, does a remarkable job and plays a pivotal role in our health system, providing care but also the support needed to those who watch their loved ones pass away and provide that wonderful care in those weeks up until that point. And that happened to me and many of my dear friends at the passing of my office manager, Sue Hall, on the 30th of March 2023. She passed away at the age of 57 from lymphoma, leaving her husband Jerry and her daughters Phoebe and Rosie. She was cared for by a Mountbatten hospice in my constituency, fabulously by the team, and the family and myself were able to count on the support of the fantastic staff at that hospice, who not only provided the best care that Sue wanted and needed and deserved, but also gave us the wraparound support during and after that period. And like many, Mountbatten provides 24/7 inpatient and community domiciliary care to Southampton and large parts of Hampshire. They support around 1,000 families every day, and demand for its services are expected to rise by 40% in the next 18 months. In essence, it costs £11.5 million to run every year, and of course relies on fundraising, which equates to about 70% of its total budget, and NHS contracting, which represents around 30% of services delivered. However, with the inadequate funding models in place and the ICB only giving a 2.4% uplift in the contracting of services, with a real rise in costs requiring an uplift of 8%, and in the year 25-26, the Hampshire ICB has once again said there will be no uplift, meaning Mountbatten will need to find an extra £750,000 to just provide the same services they do today.
On that point?
Of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Strengthening our local hospices takes pressure off our NHS. We know that. The benefits of fairer funding are plain to see, and my honourable friend makes a very good point. Yet some hospices get no public funding at all from their local NHS. One such hospice is Sidmouth Hospice Care, a home in my constituency of East Devon. Dr Sarah Wollaston, formerly of this place, chair of the NHS Devon ICB, still needs to provide a detailed idea of what funding Sidmouth Hospice at Home can get. They don't receive a penny from NHS in Devon. That's wrong. Does my honourable friend agree that it cannot be right that some hospice services and charities get funding from these integrated care boards, something we should be proud of, while others get nothing at all?
Well, I thank my honourable friend. I absolutely agree with him. And, you know, in Hampshire, we're very lucky that Mountbatten has, as I say, 30% of its services contracted by the NHS. I think the ICB, which is in special measures, as my honourable friend for the Isle of Wight mentioned, are not doing a good enough job in providing those services. But absolutely, if a hospice wants to explore getting some of that funding from the National Health Service, then they should absolutely be allowed to do so, while also recognising that independence of spirit in many hospices who choose to go their own way. But absolutely, the honourable gentleman is quite right to raise the work of his hospice in his constituency, and I hope that they will be able to acquire some of that ICB funding going forward. But as I was saying, it will cost Mountbatten an extra £750,000 just to provide the same services, while the number of people they support will rise by 200%. And now I know that the Minister, when she gets on her feet, will say that this government awarded another £1.5 billion for hospice services through ICBs, and that is entirely welcome, and I congratulate her for her announcement on that in the debate that I led in last year. But I say now what I said in the last debate, and that is that the ICBs are not passing on the money for the purposes that they were set out for. And quite frankly, ICBs, I believe, particularly mine in Hampshire, are running roughshod over the wishes of the government and are exacerbating a problem in a system that already fails to take into account the varying nature of needs across different parts of the country. I had a meeting with my honourable friend, the member for the Isle of Wight, last week with my ICB. I asked them for the details of how much of that £1.5 billion had been awarded to them, to Hampshire ICB. They could not give that answer. I then asked them how much of that was allocated to hospices in the region. They could not give that answer. So I say what I said to the Minister in June last year, that I do hope, she's doing an excellent job, and that money was very, very welcome. But I do hope that we look at a better way of holding these ICBs to account to make sure that when the government puts hard-pressed money into our health system, that they are delivering it to those frontline services that it was intended for. And that's no different in Hampshire, and I think that the leadership need to look very seriously at that, the leadership of Hampshire ICB. But Mountbatten also has to compete in an NHS workforce, and they choose to pay and award their staff quite rightly along the same pay guidelines as National Health Service staff. And this year they saw that as a 4.8% rise in costs and a further 5% next. And although, again, I thank the Minister that the government has awarded an extra £450,000 to Mountbatten, this will still leave a deficit of £1 million overall this year, but it's right that they choose to pay their staff adequately. And this will mean that Mountbatten will naturally have to lay off staff or some of its workforce, harming the outcomes for families in my constituency, but also the rest of the UK if hospices have this around the United Kingdom. And this funding instability, which I again in my local case solely blame at the ICB, who are leading a review into hospice care, seems entirely one-sided to me, while it will end up costing the NHS more money as beds are kept being used by people who should be in hospices, and hospitals pick up the burden of care. And we all know that the impact that energy bills and COVID had on this sector too. And so, although I really do not mean to sound depressing to the House this evening, I do believe that this issue is something that we have to continue to look at very strongly. And the government investment is extremely welcome, but we do need more. So I'd like to hear from the Minister in her winding up how she intends how the government and NHS nationally intend to work together to provide a sustainable long-term funding settlement for hospice care while retaining that independence that other honourable members have outlined. And we also need the Minister to review actually how much money is being passed on to hospices by ICBs, and to take a stronger line in reviewing the role of ICBs and holding them to account if they are not putting that money to the front line. There is a clear choice, and I just want to finish on this point, there is a clear choice for the government and for the hospice sector and for ICBs, and that is a sustainable funding model for our hospices, or more pressure on an already stretched National Health Service. Hospice staff I've met care and want to deliver on that challenge that many of our constituents face across the United Kingdom. But in order to do so, they need to have a level playing field to be able to provide that care. So please, let's help them do that and improve hospice care going forward.
And can I thank members for clearly focusing on shortening their speeches, because we still have, as you can see, another 15 people who wish to contribute to this debate, so I'm grateful for that. Rachael Maskell.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I just congratulate everybody that's spoken in this debate. I think the House has really come together to highlight what I really am struggling with, the fact that people, when they're at their most vulnerable, having to then beg for money in order to fund really important services. That shouldn't be the case, and yet here we are in an NHS which clearly isn't functioning, and then other services also feeling the pain. The reorganisation of the NHS did devolve powers to ICBs, but we must remember it's the responsibility of government to ensure that the structures function, and clearly that isn't happening at the moment. And of course it's our constituents who are losing out, and not least if we think about a word that keeps echoing in my mind, rolling off our lips as it always does, NHS, National Health Service. And yet we're hearing of the postcode lottery, where different areas have different experiences, different ICBs funding to different tunes. So actually where you live accounts for how you die. Surely we're better than that. Having worked with people at the end of life, throughout my career, I didn't know care like that was possible. These were words of a clinician of the extraordinary provision from St Leonard's Hospice in York. However, like all hospices, if funding isn't addressed, that care will not be possible. It was this Parliament that inferred the duty through the Health and Care Act 2022 that the inequality in access to palliative and end-of-life care must be addressed so that everyone can have the best clinical support and the holistic support that is possible if the right funding is stabilised and put in place. However, currently we know many people are not accessing palliative care. Hospice UK say 1 in 4. That's 150,000 people dying without the support that they require. And the numbers are set to rise by 25% by 2048, and according to Marie Curie, 13% in the next decade. So this debate cannot just be about what happens now, but looking at what happens in the future. In York, the hospice ran an £800,000 deficit last year. The hospice at home funding has remained static for the last 7 years. Demand has doubled. The ICB provided just 1.2% increase. Sue Ryder believed that the real cost of increase over the last year was 10%. Hospice UK figures released saying 11% rise for the payroll this year to around 130 million. Martin's House, the local children's hospice, cost 9.9 million to run, and with a total income of 8.6 million, it had a 1.3 million deficit. Only 18% of its funding came from the statutory sources, 1.1 million from the National Children's Hospice Grant and 700,000 from the ICB. Hospice UK estimate a 77 million deficit in the financial year that has just passed, the worst for 20 years. And as the demand is rising and costs are rising, the funding is not rising to match that. And as of the 12th of April 2024, St Leonard's Hospice in York didn't know how much money it was getting from the ICB, left to carry all the risk, left to depend on its reserves, and that not guaranteed, of course, for the future. And St Martin's Hospice, also using its reserves to expand its services, knows that it will only have 6 months of reserves, and it certainly doesn't know what's happening with its funding after this financial year. The children's sector, yes, has received the grant, but what comes next? We cannot just run our hospices through running marathons and running charity shops, because it is driving inequality. And in those areas of greater deprivation, fundraising is even harder, and therefore the hospices are getting even less money. I'm happy to give way.
I thank the member for giving way, and I thank the caller of this debate for getting this debate. It's been a wonderful debate and so sincere. But does the member agree with me that there should be equality, something more like equality between care at home, hospice at home, and care in the hospices? There is no doubt there is nothing better than the care in the hospices. Absolutely no doubt. I've nursed 4 people to death, family. I've nursed them, and it's always been a problem with getting the clinical support when you need it at home, and it's not there. My brother has had to search for the morphine at night time to go around when he's not had the morphine. Do you agree that there should be? They're funded even less. They're on a minimum wage.
I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for raising those points, and I do want to turn on to the issue of hospice at home. We know it's absolutely vital that people can choose where they die. Not everyone wants to die in a clinical setting. Indeed, a hospice is barely a clinical setting, but certainly do not may choose to die at home, and they should be able to receive the care they need. But my honourable friend is right. We've got to see the integration with the rest of the NHS. A district nurse may not be able to push palliative care to the extent a palliative care specialist would in providing that pain relief and the very support somebody needs at the end of life at home. We need it to be timely, and we need to ensure that it is fully funded in an area. And we certainly found that as the Health Select Committee went and visited Trinity Hospice as part of our assisted dying inquiry, and that was a point really made that we need to ensure that we put the training in so that clinicians have the competencies and the confidence to administer the pain relief and the palliative care that is necessary, but also to ensure that that service is available universally. But it isn't, and that must be addressed. We know that in York, from 1,000 people that benefit from St Leonard's Hospice, 50% of them receive hospice at home. So that number will grow over time, and we need to make sure those services are there as they need it. And of course, we know that if people are not on that pathway, they do end up in the acute service. They are then put through the trauma of A&E, costing the NHS goodness knows how much, and then not getting the care they need. But again, Trinity Hospice talked about what they were doing to divert people out of that pathway into proper care, either at home or within their wider services. So there is much still to secure on that front. If I may, Mr. Speaker, just draw one more major point before I close, and that is around the inequality. We know that there is real inequality at the end of people's lives. Some of it is based along socio-economic lines, some of it particularly emphasised within minority communities. We need to address that to ensure that we have universal provision, address the deaf literacy of our nation, and ensure that support is there when it is needed. And I am particularly concerned that if we do not have a comprehensive funding of our palliative care services, and I would urge the Minister to look at funding the staffing costs. That's 69% of all funding. It's been suggested by Marie Curie, 70% of funding comes from the state. I think that's about right. We can phase that in, but we need to ensure that we address the inequality which is driven through the system, but also putting in the research that is needed so there's better data on who is accessing care and not, but also ensuring that we're pushing palliative care as far as we can. Because if we don't, and then this debates assisted dying, I am worried that people will be fearful that they won't be able to access the care that could be possible should that service be properly funded. So I really urge the Minister to make this a priority before that debate. Mr Deputy Speaker, I will end on that point.
I am going to try and protect everybody so that they can get in, so it's a 7-minute limit forthwith. Ed Timpson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, not least for enabling me to reassure myself I can still get out of my seat despite my London Marathon legs from yesterday. Had to find a way to get that in. And can I start just with some positives, which I don't want to steal the thunder of the Minister, but there has been some really good support for hospices in recent times. We heard about the COVID support the government gave, around £400 million to increase their capacity and also enable parents to be patients to be discharged from hospital. We saw hospices benefiting from the government's energy bill relief scheme until April of last year, and since then the discount scheme until March of this year. There's been an increase in the NHS England Children's Hospice grant we heard about earlier, from 12 million in 2019-20 to 25 million in 2023-24, and I believe since July last year that has been committed through to 24-25, albeit it's now allocated through ICBs rather than directly. So why are hospices struggling? I think it's best encapsulated, Mr Deputy Speaker, by the recent Health and Social Care Select Committee report, which highlighted that, and I quote, "funding for specialist palliative and end-of-life care is insufficient, unsustainable and creating inequalities in access to and quality of care." So what does this mean for hospices in Eddisbury, my constituency, and across Cheshire? Well, take the Hospice of the Good Shepherd in Chester, which is just outside my constituency but serves many of my constituents. And as their Chief Executive, Ryan Edwards, informed me, last year they delivered over 2,000 hours of direct care per week, supporting 476 patients and their families. And to do so, they used £4 million of their own charitable funds, with the ICB contributing £1 million. And indeed, over 3 years, the ICB contribution has fallen from 22% to 20%, and they expect it to fall further to 16% in the next financial year. And this is against a backdrop of running costs, 80% of which are staff costs, shooting up, mainly as a consequence of having to match pay awards for medics and nursing staff, as welcome as they are for those workers. The impact is a forecasted operating loss of just under £1 million for 2024-25, a similar scenario to 9 out of 10 hospices across the country. And as Rhian told me, although we've always struggled to balance our books, this level of deficit is feeling very difficult. And another example, Mr Deputy Speaker, is St Luke's Cheshire Hospice in Winsford in my Eddisbury constituency, that's been providing palliative care since 1988, has 162 members of staff, 95% of the workforce live and work in Cheshire. They've got 700 volunteers, 10 charity shops, an incredible organisation, a charitable purpose at the very heart of it, and doing amazing work. But only 12% of their income at St Luke's is received through the NHS and the ICB, one of the lowest percentages of these sorts of packages across the country. It costs them £5 million a year to run St Luke's as it currently stands. So they have to raise, I've worked out, Mr Deputy Speaker, £8 a minute to keep those services going. And within the Cheshire and Merseyside region, St Luke's in Cheshire receives about £1 million less grant funding than a similar-sized hospice in Merseyside, dealing with the same end-of-life care. And as welcome as the extra funding was during COVID, the fundamental financial issues facing hospices have not gone away, simply been postponed. This financial year, for example, will see a £350,000 black hole in St Luke's finances, not helped by a staggering 60% increase in their utility costs. And as Neil Wright, the Chief Executive for St Luke's, explained to me, as a charity we have a fiduciary duty to balance the books. This means that without progressive investment of sustainable funding, hospices will have to reduce and eventually stop services over the coming years This will then place 100% of the financial burden of end-of-life care back into the already overstretched NHS. So what can be done? Well, hospices like St Luke's aren't looking for or expecting 100% funding, just a sensible, sustainable funding formula. But at the moment, Mr Deputy Speaker, ICB funding doesn't reflect the true cost of clinical care. So what do we do? Sustainability. We need, as we've heard from other honourable members, multi-year contracts which give them the confidence to deliver their services, look to invest and grow and develop to meet the needs of their communities. We have the NHS long-term workforce plan, which is hugely welcome and provides, I believe, a real opportunity to fully and rigorously assess and deliver the necessary palliative and end-of-life care services to meet the growing demand over the coming years and decades. And in doing so, it's worth remembering also that some people face greater barriers in accessing palliative care, including those who live alone, who are in poverty, with dementia, as well as those with learning disabilities. In the end, if we don't secure the long-term future of hospices, we will have created a false economy and a false reality. If we do, then we will not only reduce pressure on NHS services and reduce unplanned and potentially avoidable hospital admissions, but we will also ensure that we can deliver compassionate care for those coming to the end of their lives and their family and loved ones, and in doing so, demonstrating that we are a society that values both a good life and a good end of life.
Thank you very much. John McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm a trustee of the Harlington Hospice and have been for over the last decade. I'm hoping to stand down shortly because we've recruited 4 excellent new trustees, and I'm terrified someone might be asking me to run a marathon or something like that.
Or jump from a plane.
We've recently. Oh, no.
Well, can I just say, together with the Honourable Member for Eddisbury and Glasgow North, I did run the marathon yesterday, and I ran it on behalf of St Giles Hospice to raise over £3,000 for them. So can I invite the Honourable Member to join us in that endeavour next year? Let's not let the opportunity pass.
I set myself up, didn't I? I congratulate all those who did run. To be honest, running a marathon might well see me off, to be honest. But anyway,
might need a hospice.
We recently, over the last year or so, 2 years or so, we merged with the Michael Sobel Centre. So now we provide a bedded unit, we provided daycare facilities, we provide respite care, particularly for unpaid carers, and we do hospice at home as well. And the Honourable Member for Hammersmith said that these debates allow us to pay tribute to the organisations. I pay tribute to them, but I particularly pay tribute to the volunteers. The chairs over the recent years, if you don't mind me naming them, is Brian Neighbour, one of our local councillors, was the chair. He's no longer a councillor, but was our chair. Carol Coventry, and now Michael Breen. And they're volunteers who give up their time and bring their professional skills as well. We have a wonderful medical director, Ros Taylor, and an incredibly hard-working chief executive, Steve Curry. Their efforts provide the services and have enabled us to survive. But it has been tough, and we've just had, like a number of others have said, we've just had to lay off some staff as well. There's nothing tougher than that when you're laying off your own staff and they're so dedicated. The issue for us, as always, is, and it's the reflection that's come across the whole House, we just need core funding on a sustainable basis. We need something. It sounds a bit stuck. We just need something like a 5-year plan that we can work to, knowing, I know it sounds a bit Stalinist, but sometimes they work, and sometimes you do produce the tractors. But we need consistency over a period of time. And one of the answers that's been raised across the House, my honourable friend raised it as well, if we could rely upon staff funding from the state, that would lift the burden to a certain extent. And we'll continue on with the fantastic fundraising that goes on. But to be honest, in a working class community like mine, when there's a cost of living crisis, it's not that people don't want to give, they haven't got the resources to give. And so we've had a bit of a rough time at times. And there's a number of corporates who've helped us through. But even then, when they're looking at their margins in an economic recession or when times get hard, again, you go through that downturn as well. So we just need that consistency of funding over a period of time that will enable us then to build upon our services. Our services, to be frank, are swamped. And the range of services, they get more complex as well. We're providing a lymphedema service at 1.2 as well. The complexity of the conditions that we're dealing with requires more specialists, and that requires more funding as well. And although there's been percentage increases with regard to the NHS funding, they go nowhere meeting the real costs that we're challenged with at the moment. And we have a good relationship with our Integrated Care Board. We bid for contracts, and we work with other community organisations delivering on the ground. But it's that consistency of approach that we want. Final point from me, we've organised a conference on May the 8th. It's called Death and Dying and All That Jazz. It's bringing together a range of clinicians and others with Erdington Hospital and other voluntary services as well, under the auspices of Harlington Hospice, where we're looking at just what we're undertaking at the moment, what's needed, and then how we plan for the future. If the Minister would like to visit that conference or send representatives, we'd welcome that as well. We want to engage in a discussion. We're coming up to a general election. I'm hoping this doesn't become a general election issue, because actually what we've seen in this House, and from the work of the all-party group, which I commend, actually there's consensus around the core principles of the way forward about this. And I think if we could just secure that commitment on a cross-party basis for the long term, we could go back to our individual hospices and talk to our executives and our trustees, congratulate them on what they're doing, but give them the assurance that they will have a rock-solid financial base for the future upon which they can build and therefore rise to the challenges within our community. Final point from me, I asked just what sort of level of demand that we're facing at the moment. At the moment, there's 8 people dying in hospital for every 1 in a hospice, and yet most of those 8 people would prefer to die either at home or within hospice, and that's the challenge that we face. And I think we've seen tonight we've got the wherewithal and the ideas about how we can meet that challenge. Thank you.
Dame Maria Miller. Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I add my thanks to my honourable friends from Hastings and Rye and also Darlington for calling this debate, and for the Backbench Business Committee for granting it. But above all, Madam Deputy Speaker, to thank my constituents who have contacted me in great numbers to express their support for our hospice in Basingstoke, St Michael's. And I think that heartfelt support has been echoed across the chamber by all members. We love our hospices. They have a special part in our constituencies, in our communities, in our lives. But I think it is really important that we take a moment to reflect on exactly what hospices are asking for, because a number of members have slightly varied from actually what the Honourable Gentleman from Hayes and Harlington was just talking about. Whilst I may not agree with him about a 5-year plan too reminiscent of tractor production, but what I do agree with him is that really what hospices are calling for is consistency of funding. And one of the many constituents who wrote to me talked about the need for a national plan to ensure the right funding flows to hospitals, to make sure that there are national measures to support integrated care boards with their commissioning decisions. We've heard about that earlier. But also as a result of the new Health and Care Act in 2022, to make sure that hospices do have multi-year contracts and that they are paid the full cost of commissioned clinical services, and that they see the same uplifts in payments that other parts of the NHS see. And we know that in Hampshire that is not happening. What I don't think my constituents certainly are calling for is for hospices to be taken over by the NHS. And I think that's a really important point to make at this point, because I believe that that would be the wrong way forward. And the reason I believe that is because the amazing hospice in my constituency, St Michael's, but also Naomi House and Jack's Place that my honourable friend, the member for Winchester, referred to earlier, which are in his constituency, and provide together support for more than 1,000 families a year in our area are amazing because of the people, of course, and I thank all of the staff, the volunteers, the people who help run the shops. They are an incredible army. But they're also amazing because they are fiercely independent charities. And they can, as a result of their independence, do things that the NHS finds difficult to do, certainly difficult to do as, at pace, as they now say. And, you know, I'll give one example. It's the introduction of hospice at home many years ago in my constituency. It was done because there was a need in the constituency. It wasn't something that was being set by central government or by the NHS. It was a need locally in the constituency. I think the other reason why we need to make sure that we retain that fierce independence of our local hospices is because it involves the community. And I absolutely want to do a call out for the people I'm joining on Saturday morning for the Bluebell morning organised by Julian Pilcher in Steventon. And I'll be going there with my honourable friend, the member for North West Hampshire and others, because they raise thousands of pounds every year to support our local hospice. The hospice is part of our community and we help shape it and we absolutely help fund it. But there does need to be a better balance to the way our hospices are funding. The 2022 Health and Care Act, which introduced the statutory duty on ICBs, I think forces that point, and I hope the government minister, when she responds, can help us understand how she's going to be assisting ICBs to do their job better. But also to be looking at the variance of funding. In my own constituency, my hospice receives a very small proportion of what some other hospices do in Hampshire. And I think that disparity of funding is causing a real feeling of a lack of fairness, and particularly at a time when costs, especially wage costs, are increasing, and also the increase for demand as well. So I hope that the Minister, when she responds, can consider 3 points. Firstly, how she's going to support the ICB to better plan for removing these enormous disparities between funding between hospices. The need is no different. Sometimes the fundraising capacity is a little different. My hospices rely actually enormously, more than 80% of their funding comes from local fundraising. But how can we make sure that the NHS disparities are ironed out? How can we make sure that in funding moving from NHSE to local ICBs, things like the Children's Hospice Grant doesn't create administrative nightmares, as my honourable friend, the member for Winchester, talked about, with places like Naomi House having to negotiate with up to 6 ICBs to ensure that they continue to receive the same amount of funding. And then finally, I hope my honourable friend will be, the Minister will be able to touch upon the situation following the 2022 Health and Care Act, because there does need to be more certainty in the forward planning for hospices. There needs to be multi-year contracts to provide that certainty, especially given the pressures that they face. So can I draw my conclusions to a close by really adding my additional thanks to all of those organisations throughout my constituency and throughout North Hampshire that help fund my local hospice, whether it's the Sheffield Oaks Golf Day, whether it's the Moonlight Water around Basingstoke, whether it's our local furniture store, the 6 shops, and the list goes on. People go above and beyond in giving their time, their money and their energy to make sure that our hospices at the heart of our community. I do not want to see that changed, but I want the Minister's help to make sure that that fantastic organisation gets the support it needs from the NHS when it needs it, and certainty around the funding.
Richard Burke.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to congratulate the honourable member for securing this important debate with cross-party support. And this debate is a time for us to thank all the people who work in the hospices in our local community. And hospices have touched so many lives in all of our constituencies. St Gemma's Hospice in Leeds, serves my community, and it has a special place in my heart because my grandma, my mum and my auntie all received care there before passing away, and the staff and the team there did a fantastic job. And it was 20 years ago last month that my mum passed away in there. And just looking through Twitter this evening on the St Gemma's Hospice Twitter feed, I saw that a friend of mine, Liam Raftery, who's a fantastic musician in a Leeds band called the Lachicos, he passed away there at the age of just 30 in 2017, and I didn't realise till I saw on the St Gemma's Hospice Twitter feed today that it would have been his 37th birthday yesterday. So the hospices and the work they do touches all our lives, and they're doing a fantastic job under incredibly difficult circumstances. To take St Gemma's Hospice in Leeds as an example, St Gemma's cares for over 300 people on every day of the year, around 2,000 patients each year. But funding, as we've heard from various speakers tonight, is a huge issue. St Gemma's funding from the NHS covers less than 30% of the total hospice needs. So we need core funding on a sustainable basis. St Gemma's Hospice is budgeting for a deficit in this financial year of over £500,000, and that's why in the last 48 hours they've been having a fundraising drive online where if people donated to St Gemma's Hospice tonight before 8 o'clock, then their donation would be matched. In other words, the donation would be doubled. And I was delighted to see that due to the generosity of people in Leeds, St Gemma's Hospice more than exceeded its target of raising £200,000 in just 48 hours, which shows how valued the hospice is in our community and also shows the generosity of local people. But when I last went to St Gemma's Hospice and met with the Chief Executive, Kerry Jackson, and her team, one of the things they've made clear, and they're still making clear again, we've heard today, is that the fundraising drives in general are becoming harder and harder to do. And that's because of the cost of living crisis. People want to give, but they can't necessarily give as much as they used to give. And the people at St Gemma's Hospice, the people who run it, the people who work there, are clear. NHS funding is not sufficient. As I say, NHS funding covers less than 30% of the total hospice needs, so we need to see a change to that. And of course people mention the independence of hospices, and that's important, but we can't have a situation where people are working and running hospices in some of the most stressful possible circumstances imaginable at that crucial and painful time for so many of us when we lose our loved ones, and are also worrying not just how to care for people in the last moments of their life and look after the family, but also worrying about funding.
On that point,
I'll happily give way.
Well, my honourable friend agreed that the government should provide an increased level of funding, as he's outlining, that is long-term sustainable to all children's hospices, including Clare House and Zoe's Place in Liverpool, West Derby, provide a magnificent and crucial support to everybody in West Derby that needs it and beyond.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and he's spoken to me before about those facilities, those hospices in Liverpool and how they serve the people of West Derby. I think that's exactly correct. Sustainable funding, reliable funding, sufficient funding is needed, especially as we see an increased demand. If the hospices that we've all celebrated on both sides of the chamber tonight are going to continue to provide the service that they need, that is needed by people in our community. And I just want to end, which I know that there are plenty of other members opposite who wish to speak, by again saying thank you to each and every single person who works at St Gemma's Hospice in Leeds, to the team who work there day in, day out, and also to the generosity of people in Leeds who, even in tough times, are giving money and donating money and raising money for St Gemma's Hospice. Long may it continue to the fantastic work that it does, but to do that for decades to come And to do it more easily, we need to ensure that sufficient funding is provided, sufficient core funding. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Laing Saxby.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I wanted to take the advantage tonight to raise a specific issue with the North Devon Hospice and their hospice to home service. When I last met with their excellent Chief Executive, Stephen Roberts, last October, he flagged to me that this not commissioned service, they were no longer in a position to continue after the end of this financial year. At the time, he wrote to the then Secretary of State, the member for North East Cambridgeshire, detailing those concerns. I instantly phoned my hospital trust because North Devon is home to the smallest hospital on the UK mainland and already suffers with issues of discharge and an overstretched A&E service. So in February, when I met with Dr Sarah Wollaston, the chair of the Devon Integrated Care Board, I asked about this service in February and was assured it was all fine and that the money was being found. When this debate was announced, and many thanks to my right honourable friend, the member for Cambridge, for Hastings and Rye and Darlington for securing this debate, I contacted him and said, I'd just like to check, this was right at the end of recess, that this is all okay. And he said, Celine, your email is timely. Because no, this is not okay. Despite having had endless meetings with my Integrated Care Board, he would like me to share with the House tonight some of the email that he sent back to the Integrated Care Board following a phone call with their new Chief Executive, saying thank you for your time yesterday. I thought it would be prudent to summarise in an email where we have got to, as there's nothing on paper or email that corresponds to the discussions we've had about the offer of £95,000. This is where we stand today. North Devon's Hospice's Hospice to Home service is dedicated to support palliative patients who are at the end of life stage through increasing care at home, reducing unplanned, avoidable hospital admissions and expediting hospital discharges. He goes on to detail the 15 staff that deliver this vital service, which costs just £495,000, and the North Devon Hospice charitable funds have covered for over the last decade. The Hospice asked for funding support of £157,000, which represents the same level of commissioning support as our bedded unit and community nursing team receive. The ICB had stated that they were willing to provide £95,000 as a one-off payment before the next commissioning review period. But the Hospice had to state in return that due to their now year-on-year £1 million deficit, having funded the service for 10 years and propped up the cost of this service through cost management elsewhere in the organisation, that they are no longer able to support the service, which is at its minimum establishment to be able to operate. They have been advising the ICB of this for now 3 years.
Well, my honourable friend as well. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and she illustrates one of the biggest single challenges for hospices at home. Hospices at home rely on transport, and in an urban community that can be delivered at a relatively small cost. But in a deeply rural constituency like hers, those costs need to be met and addressed in order to deliver that care. Does she agree with me that those funding models need to address the cost of transport and travel in rural constituencies delivering a hospice at home?
And I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I could not agree with him more that actually there are many elements of healthcare, but this is one in particular, that the rurality experienced by constituencies like mine is not fully represented in the funding settlements that are agreed. My hospice requested that the ICB find the additional £65,000 to get them through to the end of the year. The Chief Exec took it back to his board and to see if we could get that 7 months of cover through. However, it's now been through a full board meeting and consultation. They then, this is where my email to him came in, he finishes his email to say that he sincerely hopes the good faith that the ICB have asked of the hospice extends to Devon ICB's good faith in finding the extra £65,000. The email he sent to me at the end of recess continues, I met with the ICB Chief Exec and he asked for 8 more weeks to see if he can do something. No promises made. My board met last night where we agreed to wait for his response before making any decisions on the service. Therefore, any pressure you can apply would be greatly appreciated. The headline is, has it really come to the point where we have to beg for £62,000 to stop 32 people dying in an emergency room? That was 4 weeks ago. They've still heard nothing. And our ICB is also in special measures. And I do beg the Minister to intervene and see if we can help our much-loved hospice as well as tackle the ever-growing issues we have with our integrated care board back home in Devon. The hospice to home service is clearly hugely valued by families, and it ensures that loved ones can get to spend their final days at home, not in hospital. And it also helps North Devon's much-loved, very small hospital and take the pressure off there as well. As it says across the shops back home in North Devon for our hospice, your life is a story and the ending matters. And I very much hope that there is a way to secure the future of this hospice to home service to ensure that we have many other happy endings.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all thank the Honourable Lady for setting the scene so very well, the Honourable Lady for Hastings and Rye, and for all of those who have made substantial contributions. Right honourable members have been incredible in their joint efforts to support hospice across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I want to add my bit from a Northern Ireland perspective as well. There will be no member in this House that has not had some form of contact with hospice care, either through our role as members of Parliament or that of a more personal nature, and many of us have, and I'm going to tell just a very quick story in relation to that. You can't talk about hospice care without first acknowledging the level of care that is provided by the world-class staff in the hospice, and every one of us knows that from those who we've dealt with and those who we know give that care. Having seen the work that they carry out and the compassion with which it is carried out, I know this is certainly a calling, because money could not pay you enough to deal with the emotional toll of this work. I remember on downstairs calling with a lady that I knew. She was worked in the health service. She was an occupational therapist. Her and I got on quite well, but she went off to a holiday in September. I think it was to Greece. She came back and went to the hospital. She wasn't feeling well. Doctor told her that she only had 4 weeks to live. She had cancer of the liver. I remember going to see her, and it was my first introduction to hospice care. It was in Marie Curie Hospice Care headquarters in Knock Road in Belfast. I remember getting in, and I said to the girl on the desk, I said, "Look, would you tell Anne that I was looking for her? I was in to speak to her." And the lady says, "Well, sure, just a minute, I'll go and see if she wants to speak to you." I said, "No, don't worry about that, because it's not important. Just tell her I called." Anyway, she went to see her, and I realised that day that the Marie Curie Hospice Care was incredible. What they did for that person, for her family, and the other thing with it, I said it in an introduction and to the Honourable Lady at the way back. I believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that faith is important, so important at a time whenever your heart's breaking and your family's all around you and your world's falling apart. And the reason why it's important is because at that stage your faith is important. And at the Marie Curie Hospice Care Centre in Belfast, they made sure that you had that faith there to help you through those difficult times. So that's really important. And what do they do, the nurses, from light-hearted banter whilst helping in embarrassing situations, to being the scapegoat for anger or frustration, to being the last person to hold a hand when a family doesn't make it in time. The role of caregiver in a hospital is more than a job. And from the bottom of my heart, from the bottom of all our hearts, I thank all of those who do most of what we couldn't do, love and serve the last breath of someone day in and day out. So thank you very much to every healthcare attendant, to the nurse, to the doctor, to the porter, to the pharmacist, the entire team that provides the best that end-of-life care can be, along with the support system for a lost and grieving family. Very happy to give way to this, John.
There's a sort of unmentioned group of heroes as well. And it was mentioned earlier, the shops that do the fundraising for our hospitals. So those volunteers in the shops who actually provide a wonderful service, in my constituency, a wonderful recycling service as well. But they provide the eventual funding as well for many of our hospitals.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for Hayes and Harlington for that. It's good to remember. I'm going to mention the volunteers later on. The Honourable Member for Walsall, he's not here, but he mentioned about the sponsored walk, and he encouraged the Right Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington to be involved. Can I say, along with the Right Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington, when it comes to a marathon, I couldn't run it. I probably couldn't even walk it, but what I could do, what the regular member could do, we could dander it. That's about the third category. So we're danderers, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I could do 26 miles, but it would be at my own pace. And I'm sure that everybody else would be away home whenever John and I, the right honourable member for Hayes and Harlington, would get across the line. But that's a story for another day.
Looking for a pub crawler.
Whilst money cannot pay them enough, we do have a responsibility to ensure that there's enough money to pay them. And currently, I don't feel that we are doing enough when it comes to this part. So, right honourable members have said that very clearly. I think what the consensus, the joint opinion, is that we all want to see them getting paid and paid better, and we want to see the care continuing. The Northern Ireland Hospice, but I want to focus upon that if we can, Madam Deputy Speaker, provides specialist palliative care for over 4,000 infants, children and adults with life-limiting conditions in Northern Ireland. That charity, which includes the only children's hospice in Northern Ireland, faces a number of challenges. But in their words, and I quote this, not least of which is the ever-growing cost of this service. It's getting more. Government funds approximately 30% of service costs, so the majority of Northern Ireland's hospice income, that's 70%. The honourable member for Darlington referred to the Foyle hospice as they had to find 65%. Well, every other hospice has to find 70% in Northern Ireland for that there. So we rely totally on the income, just on the goodwill and generosity of voluntary donations and other fundraising activities.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. And one of the things that I don't think has been brought out in any of the speeches yet is the fact that a significant amount of money that goes to our hospices in terms of their fundraising and charitable fundraising comes in the form of legacy giving. And that of itself, due to the very nature of the size of estates and the value of properties, creates a postcode lottery. And I just wondered if that is part of the problem, and we can use this debate as an opportunity to highlight that legacy giving to hospices.
Honourable gentleman for giving way, and I understand the issue that he highlights. And I'm going to speak about donations, because I think that donations the people of Northern Ireland are generous to a fault. Understanding Society data suggests that London donors, right here where we are, and I just meant donate the most annually at an average of £346 per donor. But this is due to a handful of large donors, so I understand that that's the issue. Northern Ireland is on 344. I think some of the charity figures last week indicated that Northern Ireland gives charity, all charities across, not just the hospice care, across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, more than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. Scotland is £282, the South East £270, and are the next highest regions. So we, the givers, and I am proud of this, but this then has allowed what is tantamount to an application of responsibility from those whose duty it is to see this care carried out. So we all support the Mary Curry coffee morning, where you have what I call a bun fest. Well, for a diabetic, it's not a good thing to do, but you have your tea and your coffee, and you attend and you give your donation, because that's what it's about. It's not about what you get out of it, it's about what you give to it, and that's what I see. The Macmillan Coffee Mornings and Northern Ireland Hospice events, but to me this should be to provide additional help, not to provide the foundation of the bill paying, and we must step up, and government must step up as well. People who do have as great a disposable income, and therefore the coffee morning intended to raise money for a nurse lifts half the amount when the nurse actually would need an increase to pay her wages. The public generosity cannot be relied upon to make the difference any longer, and therefore I believe that we must step up and see hospice care not as a charitable extra, but as an integral part of the NHS, because that's what it needs to be, and if it's not, then we fail. So I conclude with these comments, ever mindful of your suggestion that we keep within the 7 minutes. If we cannot supply hospice places to children with specialised staff, then we're failing in that area that we cannot afford to accept failure. And I look to the Minister, as I always do. The Minister is a good lady, Right Honourable Lady is good. She believes in the subject matter. I know that the Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady, will respond in a positive way. But I look to the Minister to ascertain how we can simply do better for palliative care hospice, not in the next budgetary normal that we have or round that we have, but starting from here and now, today in this debate, in this House, to make sure that happens. If there's a consensus of opinion that we want it to happen, then I believe that the Minister and Government should ensure that it does. Thank you so much.
Chris Green.
Madam Deputy Speaker, a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman representing Stamford, and I'd like to congratulate my honourable friends for Hastings and Rye and Darlington for securing this incredibly important debate. Now, one of the aspects that's really come across, I think, through the course of this debate is when people are talking about their local hospice and the contribution, it's always been such a positive reference to their own hospices. Hospices ought to be regarded as a very positive, uplifting thing, even though sometimes there's that negativity associated around them. Actually, they have a huge positive contribution to the community, and we ought to reflect more on that when we speak about our hospices. And certainly this is the feeling I've had when I visited Bolton Hospice, Wigan Lee Hospice and Darien House Children's Hospice. It's not just the institutions themselves, but the staff, whether it's the doctors, the nurses, the volunteers. So many people right across the organisation make a positive contribution, and this is a thing that really drives the fundraising. The vast majority of the hospice movement's funding is from the charitable sector, people giving of themselves because they believe in their own local hospice, and that I think is immensely important. We ought not to be challenging that relationship between the local community, but it does therefore immediately get into that other aspect of the funding, that part that local authorities, that part that the National Health Service gives. And when we are going through a very difficult time in the economy, it's more difficult for people to give money. Some parts of the country are wealthier and perhaps find it easier to donate to their local hospice. Other parts of the country are poorer, and perhaps they've been hit harder in recent years. When we had COVID, when we had the lockdowns, that made a huge disruption to the ability of hospices to fundraise. When we hear of colleagues going on doing a marathon, or we hear about skydiving, or all sorts of other activities that so many people around the country do to contribute to the local hospice, well, that wasn't possible for such a long period of time. And coffee mornings and so many other activities that hospices do, it takes a while for these things to be organised again, and it takes a while for people to get back into that routine of coming along to support the local community events. So this is why it's especially important for national government, local government, the National Health Service, but also now, since 2022 and the statutory footing were the Health and Care Act, put the ICBs on that statutory footing. It's the responsibility of them. As was pointed out earlier, the ICBs not supporting the hospice movement in the way they ought to in the short term, because they are under immense financial pressures themselves. That's actually going to create problems for the wider system, for the hospices themselves, but also for the local National Health Service if hospices can't continue for that short, medium and longer term to support the local communities. So a big question, I think, that's really come out of the debate we've had so far is that sense we hear of the National Health Service, which is immensely important, but also that sense, which I think is at the heart of the creation of the Integrated Care Boards, that ability to have the right care for the community that's represented by the ICB. How do we bridge that divide, that challenge between the National Health Service and also that local responsibility of the ICB? Can the ICBs do it, or does the Minister have to intervene?
Sir Robert Buckland.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate, and my thanks to my honourable friends from Hastings and Rye and Darlington, and indeed to the Backbench Business Committee for allowing time to debate this issue. And we've heard some very powerful contributions. I want to add to that by saying that any of us who have had friends or family who have gone through end-of-life care will know exactly how the hospice movement plays such an important part in ensuring that death is dignified, that it is dealt with properly, and that the wider family considerations are very much at the heart of the way in which hospices support people in that position. And it's not just about the bricks and mortar of those hospices, it's about their work in the community, what they do in people's homes, how they offer that domiciliary support, and how with a good plan that is agreed between the various agencies of our local health services, then death can indeed be dignified, it can be an experience that is entirely fitting, bearing in mind the sensitivities, the obvious sensitivities that exist around this issue. We do not talk, Madam Deputy Speaker, enough about death in modern society. We talk a lot about sexuality and sex, and that's absolutely right. But we seem to talk more about that than we do about death. And of course the Victorians did it exactly the other way around. They were obsessed with death but never talked about sex. And I do think that we need to get the balance right and talk frankly about death. As my honourable friend from Darlington has said, it's not a time to debate assisted dying, assisted suicide, as I would call it this evening, but it is a time to talk about not just the invaluable contribution of hospices, but of the future of our hospice movement and how we strike a balance between the need to maintain their independence, their flexibility, their character, which reflects the local community that they serve, and the support that I do think that is incumbent upon the National Health Service and central government, especially when we are talking about the provision of commissioned clinical services. Because this is where the interplay comes between the independent voluntary sector and indeed those the provision of those vital statutory services and clinical services that are the duty of government to provide and are the duty of the NHS to support. Now, I'm particularly lucky in that the local hospice that serves Swindon and the north and east area of Wiltshire is situated almost next door to where I live in my constituency in Wroughton. It's the Prospect Hospice. It was founded in 1980. It has grown and thrived due to the generosity and goodwill of our local community. We have 30% of our income comes from fundraising appeals and activities, and another 31% comes from the profit made from the charity shops that exist throughout the length and breadth of our area. We have many in Swindon. In fact, we opened a new one in Parks, in the Parks shopping centre only a few months ago, which is already doing very well and serving that local community admirably. We have 11% of our income from legacy. And I'm glad that was mentioned by my honourable friend from Darlington, because legacy gifts are vitally important. And with other investment income, that brings the amount to about 75% raised through that way, with 25% from our statutory services, from our ICB. Now, I think all of us have talked about the pressure of inflation. That is a reality on Prospect as well. Costs have increased significantly, and the sad challenge that we've faced in our hospice is that we've had to decrease the number of beds in fact, we've halved the number of beds from 12 to 6, and we've had to close the day therapy unit. I can say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that unit was invaluable. The number of volunteers that worked in it and the support that it gave to people at the end of lives was something that we miss very much. And I think COVID certainly wreaked havoc with regard to the fundraising ability of Prospect and other hospices, and that leaves a shortfall in the last year of just over £1 million. With the best will of the world, it is going to be very difficult to make that up, which is why this debate is important, not just for Prospect, but also for Julia's House, which is the children's hospice serving Wiltshire and Dorset, based in Devizes, which I visit very often and know the benefit for children who were my constituents. So we're talking here about not just a fundraising effort, but the effect of the involvement of volunteers in the service, which brings them huge fulfilment and which allows a whole range of people, many thousands of people, to offer their time and their talent in order to make that difference. I don't want to lose that. I don't think any of us want to lose that. But all we're saying, I think, in this debate is that there does need to be a sense of reality when it comes to the funding of commissioned services. And there's no doubt the government have moved in the right direction. We've moved leagues in the last 10 or so years. The support that the government gave for the hospice movement during COVID was admirable. And the introduction, the very introduction of that statutory duty, the first time we saw that in the 2022 Act, was a signal moment. A moment, if you like, when the hospice movement came of age and when end-of-life and palliative care was recognised quite rightly as an integral part of the way in which we provide and commission health in this country. Now, my local ICB has set up an alliance, which I think is good, an end-of-life alliance. I think now we need to see more work to be done in order to make sure that that coming together does result in an avoidance of duplication, the coming together of services around patients, around clients, rather than it being the other way round, and an acknowledgement that without hospices like Prospect, that then simply we are going to fail thousands and thousands of people who have come to rely upon this invaluable service. Much more that I could say. I pray and aid the excellent submissions, the remarks made by honourable and right honourable friends and members. I think the call here is a clarion call and a unified call that we want to see our hospice movement thrive, and we cannot do that without the input of government and local health services.
James. Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome today's debate on this very important issue, and can I take this opportunity to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Hastings and Rye, and indeed my honourable friend, the member for Darlington, for this excellent debate today. Everyone should receive appropriate and dignified care, personalised to their individual needs, as they approach the end of their life. Hospices are central to delivering this care, which includes Lauros Hospice for adults based in Leicester West, which provides care to my terminally ill adult constituents, as well as the fantastic Rainbows Hospice for babies, children and young people located in my Loughborough constituency. Since becoming an MP, I have visited Rainbows Hospice on a number of occasions and seen firsthand the professionalism and dedication of their staff, who provide the highest levels of care to around 300 of the estimated 1,739 children and young people with life-limiting conditions in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, as well as their families. Rainbows also cares for hundreds more babies, children and young people with serious and terminal conditions across the wider East Midlands area, providing support at their hospice in Loughborough, as well as in local hospitals and at home. Rainbows are particularly concerned about children and families' access to round-the-clock end-of-life care at home, provided by nurses and supported by advice from consultant paediatricians, specially trained in paediatric palliative medicine. I am told that only a third of local areas in England are meeting the required standards for this. In Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, Rainbows have informed me that there is no 24-hour end-of-life care available at home, other than based on goodwill provision from the Diana team. Therefore, in October 2023, Rainbows launched their Hospice at Home service, which they provide jointly with community nursing teams. However, there are no paediatric palliative care consultants across the East Midlands, and no funding is available to support this essential service. As such, Rainbows is currently paying for remote support from a consultant in another region. Rainbows also funds 2 clinical nursing specialists working in the Leicester Royal Infirmary. In addition, they provide paediatric palliative care single point of contact, which is a pilot and is currently funded by the Paediatric Palliative Care Network, although future of this funding is not guaranteed. Furthermore, Rainbows provide end-of-life care, symptom control and short breaks at their hospice in Loughborough. Their therapists offer support in the hospital, and they provide ongoing bereavement support to families. I am told that in total in 24-25, it will cost Rainbows £12.1 million to provide their services. Over the same period, they will receive roughly £1.7 million in statutory funding, which works out to be around 14% of their costs, only enough to keep Rainbows open for 7 weeks. They will also receive £99,000 from Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland ICB and £1.4 million from Children's Hospice Grant for all 5 counties. This income totals £3.2 million, leaving a shortfall of £8.9 million, which Rainbows has to try and find itself. Furthermore, regarding the Children's Hospice Grant, while Rainbows has been told that they will receive this for 2024-25, the ICB has still not confirmed that they will receive the funding in subsequent years. Together for Short Lives has also highlighted that, while ICBs and hospices are now clearer about their process for distributing the grant, thanks to the confirmation from the government, it still remains unclear when hospices will receive the funding from ICBs, as well as how and to what extent NHS England will hold ICBs to account in making sure this money is paid out. As a result, at the moment, hospices do not have the reassurance of a long-term NHS-funded plan, and so I would seek clarification from the Minister on these points. While Rainbows are fantastic at fundraising, the position they are currently in is simply not sustainable, particularly given that the number of children with life-limiting or life-threatening conditions is increasing. If we restrict the services existing hospices provide by not supporting them with adequate funding, this provision will have to be found elsewhere, and responsibility will likely fall to the state. I would therefore encourage the Government and NHS England to accept Together for Short Lives' recommendation to review children's palliative care funding going forward and fill the £295 million gap in NHS spending on children's palliative care in 24-25. This should either be met centrally by maintaining ring-fenced NHS England funding beyond 24-25, or by setting out a framework under which ICBs are required to provide the sustainable funding. If urgent action is not taken, I share Rainbow's concerns that more seriously ill children and their families will be denied choice and control over the palliative end-of-life care. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would ask the Minister to not change a single atom of Loros or indeed Rainbow's Children's Hospice, because they both provide excellent care. However, please work alongside them as much as you can and get the ICBs in particular to deliver on that funding that was already mentioned by my colleague earlier on. Thank you.
Bob Seeley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I won't take up too much of your time. I want to thank my honourable friends from Hastings and Rye and Darlington for organising and securing this debate. It's actually a very important one, and I'm hugely grateful that they've done it. And I think it's very clear from the amount of people who've taken part in this debate, the affection that hospices hold, not only in our hearts but also the hearts of our constituents. And I have great respect for that, both on the Isle of Wight and throughout the country. And clearly they comfort people in times of extraordinary difficulty and death, not only for those people who are dying, but also for their families. These are very difficult times, and hospices provide both succour and professional support, and actually probably above all love and comfort. On the island we have the Mountbatten Hospice, and I know that my honourable friend from Eastleigh spoke earlier about the Mountbatten Hospice, and I want to develop some of the points that he makes and echo them. So we have the Mountbatten Hospice in Newport. It is one of our most cherished institutions on the island. I thank all those people. I'm going to have a few thank yous now. I want to thank firstly all the people who work there in our Mountbatten Hospice and support it for the fantastic work they do caring for people on the Isle of Wight. And I also want to pay special tribute to the head of our hospice, Nigel Hartley, one of the most impressive people we have on the island, and actually one of my favourite islanders. He was a concert pianist before he started looking after people in the London Lighthouse Clinic in the relatively early days of the AIDS pandemic. And he learnt to care for people at that time before moving eventually to the island and bringing a unique sense of, occasionally eccentric, but organised, highly competent and very loving leadership to that institution. And I think we are hugely lucky on the island to have somebody like Nigel. On their behalf, I want to raise just a few issues and get some clarity from the Minister. And I know I'm not the only one saying this, but for backbenchers, there's clearly strength in numbers. And many of the issues that I have are issues that have been raised as well, but I want to put them on the record. I don't want the NHS to take over hospices. We need to respect the charitable status of our hospices, because it's something that gives them strength. They are so directly related and engaged in our communities. But we do need the NHS to pay its way in relation to our hospices. And in the last 2 years, Mountbatten on the Isle of Wight and indeed in Eastleigh, the Mountbatten Hospice, the two of them, have had cash increases from the NHS of under 2%, if I understand correctly the figures, but also under 3%. Their costs have gone up much higher. We are putting our hospices under very considerable financial pressure. So we're having to dig deeper into fundraising, or we're having to make cuts or look at ways of making cuts. This is not acceptable. We are not asking for the NHS to step in but we are asking for the NHS to pay its way, and if it is using the hospices, to give them sufficient funding, because otherwise the burden of looking after the NHS responsibilities, for want of a better term, is falling very heavily on people, whether it's in folks in Eastleigh, in my honourable friend's constituency, or indeed on the island. And in fact, we have our major fundraising for the Isle of Wight, for the Isle of Wight Hospice, for the Mountbatten Hospice on the 12th of May. Walk the Wight, fantastic event. Last year it raised £460,000. But running a hospice is expensive. And when you're dealing with inflation, below inflation increases from our ICB, that is problematic. And I would raise one other issue as well from our ICB. My right honourable friend, the member for Eastleigh, and I had 2 conversations with the ICB last week. One just on the Isle of Wight Hospice and the Eastleigh Hospice, Mountbatten Hospice. And one was a shared conversation with Hampshire and Hampshire colleagues and myself, talking about the work of the ICB. It's in special measures. We were told that somehow this was a very good thing, that it was in special measures, but clearly there is pressure on their expenditure, there is pressure on their budgets, and actually there's pressure on their, how shall we say, management decisions in relation to their budget. And what I'm really concerned about is that when you have ICBs in special measures, hospices, cutting funding to hospices is seen as a quick win as opposed to acute services, which are hugely expensive, which we know, but also potentially to primary care as well. And yet, effective spending in primary care actually eases pressure on acute services, but also effective spending on hospices paying their way. So I'm not talking about taking over the system, but actually giving a little bit more funding. Near inflation increases for those hospices enables the hospices to perform a hugely, hugely important moral duty, medical duty, but also a duty to those people, not only who are dying, but also the families in their support of them, not only in the hospice, but increasingly now for my Mountbatten Hospice, and I suspect it's the same for the honourable member for Eastleigh, but actually looking after people as they near death in their own homes. So on behalf of my hospice, I'm asking, please, can we make sure the ICB that covers Hampshire and the Isle of Wight is doing its job effectively, doing its job properly, because I think it is fair to say, without being ungenerous towards these people, some of us have our concerns, and some of us have real concerns about some of the decisions being made. So can we make sure the ICB is managing its affairs well, but in doing so is also giving the support to the hospices, both in Eastleigh but also in Newport and the Isle of Wight, which our hospice, the Mountbatten Hospice, so badly needs. Thank you.
Chris Loader.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to contribute to this debate. I'd like to note that Dorset is well represented here, with my honourable friend and neighbour from South Dorset also here in the debate. Madam Deputy Speaker, in West Dorset there are few other charities that are so cherished by local people as Weldmar Hospice Care. The Weldmar Hospice in Dorchester must be one of, if not the most, respected and cherished hospices in West Dorset and Dorset as a whole. Most of my constituents will have had a family member or will have known someone who Weldmar has looked after at the end of their life, and it is the reason why the hospice is so dearly loved, not just in Dorchester or even just in West Dorset, but across the county. The Weldmar nurses looked after my own aunt in her final days some 15 years ago, and I'm eternally grateful to them for all they did for her and continue to do for friends of people who I know that are taken care of, not just in the Dorchester Hospice, but through the community nursing team too. Weldmar is Dorset's largest independent charity and has provided specialist end-of-life care since 1994. Over the last 3 decades, they have looked after 24,882 patients, both in the community and in their specialist inpatient unit in Dorchester. The care is free of charge, and last year alone, 1,745 families benefited from this vital care and support with Weldmar. This is undoubtedly why the community feels so passionately about our hospice, and with it, the innovations and fundraising, the successes that the incredible team at Weldmar have with its work to raise money. But in order for Weldmar to sustain itself, as is the case with so many hospices, it needs to raise £27,200 every single day to keep these services running, and this is on top of the NHS income. In January 2024, the APPG on hospice and end-of-life care published a report on government funding for hospices. The report found that despite statutory guidance, ICB commissioning of hospice services, and I quote, is currently not fit for purpose, and the value they provide to individuals and the wider health system is at risk. The government announced additional funding for hospices during the coronavirus pandemic, and in a Westminster Hall debate on the 17th of January this year, my honourable friend the Minister set out some of the wider financial support available for hospices, to include the energy bills discount scheme, eligibility for a reduction in VAT from 20% to just 5%, and in 2022, the NHS England released £1.5 billion in additional funding to integrated care boards to provide support for inflation. It is my opinion, Madam Deputy Speaker, that palliative and end-of-life care needs a much greater priority within the Integrated Care Partnership Strategy too, as it is in many areas. We want to make sure that we sustain Weldmar and other provision long into the future, but that we can also consider and support more end-of-life care. In places like Lyme Regis and the areas where it is so far to travel to a hospice, they would greatly benefit from additional provision. In summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm contributing to this debate today in order that it be known and understood that in West Dorset we cannot speak highly enough of our hospice, that in West Dorset we value the Weldmar team so much, and I actively ask the Minister here and the Government to give consideration to these matters as we've been debating this evening.
Richard Drax.
Deputy Speaker, can I congratulate my honourable friends, the members for Hastings and Rye and Darlington, who sits beside me, and it's a pleasure to follow my colleague from West Dorset. Can I start by thanking all those who work in the hospices? They do a remarkable job, and we should be very grateful for all they do. In 2003, when I was reporting for BBC South Today, I was sent to the official opening of Julia's house in Corfmullen, Dorset. Little did I know that the first person I'd meet there was my mother, who sadly died in 2019. Her instinct for caring and compassion drew her to this remarkable hospice for children like a moth to a flame. I was immediately struck by the wonderful environment the dedicated staff had created, and a desperately needed service to provide practical and emotional support to families caring for a child with life-limiting or life-threatening condition was born. Julia's House is one of more than 200 adult and children hospices that care and support about 300,000 patients a year, Madam Deputy Speaker. They work hand in hand with local health and care services, taking the pressure off the NHS. Hospices, as we've heard, are mainly funded by charity. On average, around 2/3 of the income for adult services is raised through fundraising. For children, and alarmingly, that figure is 4/5. In 2022, the Health and Care Act introduced for the first time, as we've heard again, a legal duty for integrated care boards to commission palliative care services that met the needs of the local population. However, a recent report, and again we've heard this in the Chamber, and I make no apology for repeating myself or repeating what colleagues have said, a recent report by the APPG on hospice and end-of-life care co-chaired by my honourable friend from Darlington sitting right here beside me, found that despite this legal requirement, funding from ICBs varied significantly across the country. Today, the sector is under significant financial pressure. Hospice UK estimates the sector is on track for a £77 million deficit for the financial year in 2024. Nowhere is this more real than at Julius House. The Chief Executive, Martin Edwards, said that over 90% of the annual running costs were met by fundraising. The government's contribution remains low at only 8%. This over-reliance on people's generosity, which is enormous, will see Julius House face a budget deficit of £1 million this year. If the member from the SNP can refrain, I'd be grateful. This dire situation is exacerbated by the ending this year of a share grant of £25 million from NHS England. Julius House cares at its 2 sites for 176 families across Dorset and Wiltshire. Mr. Edwards said they were coping with children and with more complex needs, requiring more staff and putting more pressure on budgets. The care provided is intensive, Madam Deputy Speaker, with a family being supported for up to 5 years following the death of a child. As you might imagine, palliative care comes with all kinds of issues, not least medical, emotional and financial. Who do you turn to for help and advice? How does the patient wish to be cared for, and who supports the carer? This is where a remarkable charity called Lewis Manning Hospice Care comes into play. The Chief Executive, Claire Galley, told me their team comes to your home and in effect responds to the needs of the patient and family by signposting them to relevant services, from treatment to transport. Importantly, it is the need of the patient which is most significant. So, for example, if their wish is to die at home, everything possible is done to ensure that that happens. Importantly, this free service is proactive rather than reactive, anticipating what the patient and family want, reducing crisis at the end of life, and saving the NHS a lot of money by freeing up GPs' time and negating the need for a hospital. A pilot scheme being run in a part of Dorset has already saved the NHS £140,000 in April alone. Imagine if this scheme was rolled out across the country, Madam Deputy Speaker, it would save the NHS millions. Let me conclude. There is no doubt there is a need for more government funding for hospices, independent, fiercely so, as they are. But the funding disparities, as we've heard from every speaker virtually, must be looked at. Yes, I hear the government say it's another call for money, and there are many other demands. But well-funded hospice care would safeguard this very effective and necessary sector, which can or not live on charity alone, and nor should it.
Peter Alders.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my honourable friends, the members for Hastings and Rye and Darlington, for so ably leading this debate and setting the scene. Whilst it's important to recognise the great work done across the eastern region by East Anglia's children's hospices, in the Great Yarmouth and in the Waveney area, as represented by my right honourable friend, the member for Great Yarmouth, and myself, there is at present a hospice vacuum. Throughout the rest of Suffolk and Norfolk, there are locally based hospices well embedded in and providing great services for their communities. The good news, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that plans are being carefully prepared to fill this vacuum and this void. A local partnership is evolving to build a local hospice led by St Elizabeth Hospice and including the local NHS, councils, a community interest company, volunteers and fundraisers. To be successful, to open the hospice and then to run it, national government must join this partnership. And I hope that my right honourable friend, the Minister, who is currently not in her place, in her summing up, will accept this invitation. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Waveney and Great Yarmouth areas desperately need a hospice. We have an ageing population, pockets of deprivation, and as Chris Whitty has highlighted, there are acute health inequalities in coastal communities which a hospice can help level out and remove. As I've mentioned, a well-researched case for the hospice has now been prepared, though it is important to recognise the work done by so many over the years in supporting those in need of end-of-life care and their families. The late Margaret Chadd, who founded East Coast Hospice, had the vision of building a hospice on land bought at Galston. Roberta Lovick, who founded the Louise Hamilton Centre, from which such great support is provided to patients with life-limiting conditions and their families, to the James Paget Hospital, where the Louise Hamilton Centre is based, and to East Coast Community Healthcare, the Lowestoft-based community interest company, who in partnership with St Elizabeth operate 6 specialist beds in Beccles Hospital, as well as providing care in both people's homes and in care homes. Madam Deputy Speaker, building on the work of these local people and these local organisations, a framework is now emerging through which a local hospice can now be built. The cornerstone of this is, of course, as we've heard, the Health and Care Act of 2022, which sets out the legal requirement for ICBs to commission palliative and end-of-life care. The Norfolk and Waveney ICB have responded by carrying out a review of palliative and end-of-life care. This was completed last autumn and highlights the need for 9 urgent and 6 medium to long-term actions. Last March, St Elizabeth Hospice merged with East Coast Hospice and straight away set about conducting a feasibility study into the viability of building up hospice facilities on the Galston site. This study has just been completed, and the conclusion that has been reached is that a hospice should be built in stages, and expressions of interest are now being invited from architects. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is an exciting landmark for which so many people have strived for so many years. St Elizabeth are confident that they can successfully fundraise for hospice capital appeal. However, it is with the ongoing revenue cost of providing core clinical services for a full inpatient unit, as well as outreach community services, that national government support is required. The Norfolk and Waveney ICB, and indeed all ICBs, need central government support and a fundamental rebalancing of national policy so that they can meet the projected growth in demand for palliative care. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is good news that after so many false dawns over so many years, we now have a coherent and well-thought-through plan for filling the hospice void in the Waveney and Great Yarmouth area. Whilst we should be sanguine, we should also be realistic. We are not even at the starting point as the rest of England, as we've heard from those other colleagues who actually have a hospice up and running. We don't. And that is why the government need to join the partnership that has evolved and support the Norfolk and Waveney ICB so that they can commission hospice services on a long-term, multi-year basis. And I urge the government to join us on this exciting journey. Thank you.
Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's becoming a bit of a habit of me being the warm-up act for the wind-ups, but I gather I'm not going to get that on this evening. It's a great privilege to be able to speak in this debate, which clearly is heartfelt by many members across the House, and I congratulate my honourable friends who secured this debate. The subject of hospices, I think, is one of those that most of us hope we never really get to experience firsthand in our lives, but when we do experience them because a loved one needs their care and support, you realise just how important and how valuable they are. And I'm incredibly proud and privileged to have two exceptional hospices in my constituency. Mount Edgecombe Hospice, that is part of Cornwall Hospice Care, that was opened in 1980 and was Cornwall's first hospice. It's recently been rated by the CQC as outstanding, and in particular highlighting the caring and personal nature of the service provided by the staff who are responsive to the needs of the patients. And I didn't need the CQC to tell me that, because my family and I know that firsthand, because back in 2007 my mother died of cancer at Mount Edgecombe Hospice. She lost her second battle with breast cancer, and the care and support that we received as a family was absolutely outstanding, and I want to place on record my huge thanks to them. But I'm also greatly privileged to have Little Harbour, which is part of Children's Hospice South West in my constituency, that opened in 2011. And they provide some of the very best facilities found in any children's hospice in the country, with state-of-the-art facilities there. And having visited it a number of times myself, I can testify that the atmosphere there is truly amazing, and you cannot be helped but be moved by that place. They support children and young people up to the age of 21, including the youngest babies who need their care. And again, at that hospice, the CQC praised the hospice staff for their personalised care and support. And I think that reinforces the very important point that it isn't just the bricks and mortar or the equipment that these hospices provided. It is the staff there and the volunteers that work there that actually make our hospices the amazing places that they are. We're very lucky in Mid-Cornwall to have these two excellent examples of some of the 200 hospices that we have across the country. Both are supported by amazing people, volunteers, fundraisers and donors who play such an important part in ensuring that those hospices can continue. And it isn't just the care that the hospices provide to the people who are sick. We've heard many times in the chamber today about the wraparound care that they provide to families, to friends, that is so important and valuable. And it's clear that the role of hospices... I will briefly, yes, okay.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very moving and powerful speech. And he recalls for me my experience at Chestnut Tree House, which provides hospice care for children across Sussex. And although they are striving hard to meet all the demands on services, one of the groups that we haven't mentioned in the course of this debate is those that the hospice may yet reach. They know that there are very, very many more families who would benefit from their care, and they're working hard to do that. Is this something that he also has found in his constituency?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention, and she makes precisely the point that I'm coming on to make, is that it's very clear in our country that there is going to be a growing need for hospice care as we go forward. We feel this incredibly acutely in Cornwall, where we have seen more than our elderly population has grown by more than 50% in the last 10 years. In Cornwall, we're now at the point where almost 1 in 4 of our population is over 70 years old, and that is only going to grow in the years ahead. And that is simply going to mean that there is more demand for hospice care in our country. And that is why it is so important that hospice care is properly funded. Now, I believe it is the best for our hospices to stay in the independent sector as charities. They gain most of their support from the public. This is seen time and time again, I think, in my experience of the two hospices in my constituency, that being independent from the NHS gives them a very special place in our communities. People feel a great connection to them. They feel they have a personal stake in the work that they do, particularly if they engage in fundraising towards them. And I fear that that may well be lost if they became nationalised effectively. And I believe that is so important for our hospices that we are able to continue that. However, I do believe that the government need to better recognise the important role that hospices play. We've heard several times about the postcode lottery there is for NHS funding towards our hospices, and I think that is something I would say to the Minister we really do need to look at addressing. Cornwall Hospice Care, I'm told, is the second lowest level of funding of any hospice charity in the country. Just 9% of their funding comes from the NHS. That means 91% of their funding is raised through fundraising, donations and legacies. And I don't think that can be right. That I'm all for donations playing a significant part in the funding of hospices, but I believe, particularly in Cornwall, that the NHS should be stepping up and providing more funding to our hospices. So we do need to look at the regional variations, and it really does need to be based on need and the need in those regions for the hospice facilities. And I would urge the Minister and the Government to look at what more can be done to provide a proper level playing field when it comes to NHS contributions to our hospices. We've all heard again that the last few years have been really difficult for our hospices, with the growing pressures on costs rising and demand rising. And I do think that one of the things we could really do for the hospice sector is provide more certainty of funding going forward, to provide multi-year funding settlements so that they can plan far better. They know at least what funding is coming from the NHS, so that they have that certainty and can plan accordingly. So, in summing up, I just want to place on record again my huge thanks to every hospice in our country and the incredible work they do, both the paid staff, the volunteers and the fundraisers who work so hard and are so generous in providing this vital service to our communities, and particularly to the two that I represent in my constituency. And I really hope that there's been a real consensus across the House this evening that whilst we value and we celebrate all the work that they do, we do think that more needs to be done to provide them with a fairer level of funding going forward, so that they can continue to play the vital role that they play for our communities.
Yeah. James Sunderland.
Madam Speaker, I'm humbled to be called in this debate, and can I please commend the members for Hastings and Rye and also Darlington for bringing this debate to the House this afternoon, and also the Minister who sat through, shown amazing resilience with what's been a long evening. What I've noticed this evening about this debate is that members that have spoken sort of fall into broadly two camps. So there are those who've had personal experience of hospices, family members who have suffered and needed the facility, and those speeches have come across amazingly, real pathos, real depth, and I commend all of the members that have spoken so personally about their journeys, and also perhaps members like me who have not had personal experience of hospices but recognise the importance of what they do. And if I may, in the time that I've got, let's sort of talk about two hospices in my constituency which I think are very important. The first one is that Thames Valley Hospice, as it was first known, was officially opened by Her Majesty the Queen in November 1987 in Windsor at Hatch Lane. And that's been serving my constituents and others in Berkshire since that time, showing amazing strength of character in supporting so many people. And my contention this evening with the Minister in her place is the fact that, as we've heard, we do need to refine funding models for hospices. It's been said before numerous times this evening, but in my view the NHS does need to cough up a bit more support. And in my view also it's about timing, because Thames Hospice, I know, awaiting its funding settlement for 24-25 with barely 2 weeks to go, is still waiting for that decision from the ICB. So it's about funding, it's about how much can be funded by the taxpayer, but also it's about getting funding notified up front, and that's really important because it means that they can plan ahead for the year. Thames Hospice in 2016 having provided so much care all that time, was granted planning permission to build a new £22 million state-of-the-art facility on a brand new 8-acre site by Bray Lake, which is just outside Maidenhead in the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. And why is that important? Well, it's important because that serves Frimley ICB, it serves many, many constituents to the east of Berkshire, including Bracknell. And I know of many constituents that have had fantastic care there. And in January 2019, work began on the construction of that site. By 2023, with the new site being built, and I visited earlier last year, an absolutely incredible site with so many fantastic staff, a cafe, dedicated services. Thames Hospice has supported around 2,500 patients and their loved ones annually with high quality medical and emotional support. This is all about making people's lives easier and making sure that the remaining time on the earth is made as dignified as possible. And we can't underestimate that. We cannot put a price on that, we can't put a value on that, which is why we have a responsibility, in my view, to fund it properly. As for the future, by 2030, 15 million people in the UK will be over 65 years old. We also know that the number of young people with life-limiting neurological conditions has increased by 64% over the last 10 years. That's a really serious figure. And also the incidence of cancer in people under the age of 50 has risen by 79% between 1990 and 2019. Just think about that. These are really serious figures. And what does that mean? It means that the demand for hospice services is only likely to increase over time. Also, costs have increased by 9% at Thames Hospice over the course of the past year, with no commensurate increase in government funding. And that's a very similar picture that we've heard from other speakers this evening. So to put a figure on it, every day at Thames Hospice, they've got to raise £38,000 to subsidise the costs of care. And without even considering investment to grow in the future, this will increase to over £50,000 per day by 2030, based upon a 4% increase year on year. It is a similar picture elsewhere. And to put it in perspective, Thames Hospital itself needs £18.5 million for 2,500 people every year. It's really, really stark. And as I mentioned earlier, Thames Hospice is the end-of-life care provider for the Frimley Health Integrated Care Board in East Berkshire. So it's of direct relevance to my constituents, and I can't thank the staff and the directors at Thames Hospice enough for what they do. Just before I finish, I want to just mention Sebastian's Action Trust as well in Crowthorne. Why is that important? It's important because it provides palliative care for children aged between 0 and 18, and it also supports their families. And a key part of the support that the brilliant Sebastian Action Trust provides is that it provides memory-making support for the families that use the facility. And it also continues to support the families once a child goes to the end-of-life care. Losing a child is devastating anyway, but the fact that Sebastian Action Trust does it so brilliantly in terms of the support that it provides to families, even after that life event, is really remarkable.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Please do. Thank you.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way, and just on the issue of funding for children's palliative care, I'm very fortunate in my neck of the woods in West Yorkshire to have the Forget-Me-Not Children's Hospice. We also have the Kirkwood Hospice as well. But just bringing this backbench debate to an end and focusing on hospice funding, I just wanted to highlight the Together for Short Lives campaign ask. And I've just been looking again at their main campaign ask. I know he's mentioned this. It's not just sustainable funding, it's having the surety of that funding moving forward and a multi-year promise and confirmation of funding beyond 24-25 so that children's hospices can plan for the future and continue delivering and caring for children with life-limiting illnesses and for their families.
Can I please thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and it's very, very timely, because as we know, palliative care is not formally funded by the NHS, it's privately funded, and it cannot be right that such an important function is hand-to-mouth in terms of the funding that they need. And to prove that point, Sebastian's Action Trust in Crowthorne is going to close their Crowthorne site later this year, called the Woodlands, and as sales expected in autumn 24, it physically cannot afford the care that it's giving to so many families, with the result that it's having to rationalise its own estate and move elsewhere. So in conclusion, in my humble view, with the Minister in place, the funding at the moment from the NHS is just not enough, both for our hospices and also for our palliative care. Please do.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way in the powerful case he's making in favour of the hospice movement, indeed all colleagues, during this debate. Does he agree with me that every penny the government gives to the hospice movement takes pressure off the National Health Service? They're doing the job that otherwise the NHS would have to do. And will he join me in congratulating the St Francis Hospice in the village of Havering, Attybower in my constituency, established in 1975, many years of serving the local people in the London Borough of Havering and the surrounding area. It's a magnificent organisation. The hospice movement does a fantastic job for the people of the entire country, and really it's time for the government to do more.
Once again, can I please thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and once again I completely commend everyone in Havering, St Francis and hospice staff there for what they do. It sounds remarkable, and we've heard so many stories this evening of other hospices and palliative care providers right across the country, and the message is quite clear. We need more funding. We've got to establish better funding models for it. We can't rely so much upon charities and donations. We have to make sure also the funding is provided up front. And I just think this is such an important life and death issue. And the fact that also they take, they take pressure off the NHS in terms of what they provide. If you go to Thames Hospice, for example, you look at the facilities there, they're so modern, they're state-of-the-art. I think we could sweat the asset an awful lot more. And perhaps it might even be that underutilised capacity of hospices could in some way be hired back to the NHS for the facilities they've got. But I think we can do more to sweat the assets. Please do.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving me. I just want to put this one final point in the final backbench contribution to this debate. We've heard many people call for multi-year funding settlements. Now, that's not to make life easy for the hospices, but it makes life more sensible for them to be able to plan into the future, in order for them to sign leases, buy equipment, train, recruit and retrain staff. It's there in order. The request for multi-year funding settlements is in order to allow them to put the plans in place to provide the care that they need.
Yeah. Once again, thank you to the member for Darlington, and I agree completely. Nobody can plan in a vacuum. And therefore, this is about more money, this is about earlier money, this is also about the ability to plan so that we know what the delta is. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to conclude now, but thank you for the opportunity of speaking this evening. We need more money, Minister, and I know you'll give it to us.
SNP spokesperson Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the honourable members for Hastings and Rye and Darlington on securing the debate and being able to bring this vitally important issue to the floor of the House after a series of Westminster Hall and other debates in the context of the spring budget, at the start of the new financial year with a general election on the horizon. It's an incredibly timely debate, and of course it also coincides with the publication of Hospice UK's report, which estimates a deficit across the UK hospice sector of £77 million in the 23-24 financial year. The estimate in Scotland, that's around £16 million, perhaps the worst financial outturns for the sector in nearly 20 years. And the same report suggests an 11% increase in payroll costs to hospices, representing around £130 million, because of course people who work in hospices have every right to expect a decent competitive salary that allows them to make sure their own households are safe and warm. But that is a challenge being driven by the wider cost of living crisis, which is itself having an effect on the hospices, because the areas of heating, food and drink and other consumables are not discretionary expenditure. Hospices have to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have to maintain a comfortable temperature. They have to provide nutritious, high-quality food. And all of this comes at a time, as the member for Bracknell has just said, when the demand for such wonderful care has perhaps never been higher, because people are living longer, they're dying at later ages, and that means there's ever greater need for palliative care. The ONS estimates that in Scotland, an additional 10,000 people a year might be expected to seek access to palliative care by 2040. And we've heard some very moving individual testimonies from different members across the House today. The members for Coventry North East, for West Dorset, for Leeds East, all spoke of personal experiences of the hospice movement. The member for Birmingham, Erdington, I thought made some very worthwhile points about hospices being a place where people can really live the final days of their lives. And the member for Eastleigh has been very passionate about this for reasons that he explained about his former Chief of Staff. And we echo the condolences that have previously been paid. And I'm incredibly grateful for the love and care shown to my good friend Melanie, who passed away in the Highland Hospice just over a year ago. And I was proud to be one of the runners yesterday in the London Marathon in her memory and in aid of that hospice. And I equally congratulate the members for Walsall North and Enfield Southgate, who ran for their local hospices, and the members for Eddisbury and Colchester, who also took part in the debate and ran for other worthy causes. And I understand in a few weeks' time, the member for Lancaster and Fleetwood will take part in the 40-mile Keswick to Barrow walk through the Lake District in aid of St John's Hospice in Lancashire. I also want to pay tribute to the work of the Marie Curie Hospice in Glasgow, which has provided care at the end for other friends of mine, particularly some that I've known through the SNP. And in recent weeks, close friends have had reason to be grateful to everyone at St Vincent's Hospice in Renfrewshire in very sad and difficult times. And I think those personal experiences are what help to inspire that incredible generosity that allows the hospice movement to continue its work. As we've heard, 2/3 of adult hospice income comes from such voluntary fundraising, while at the same time, as the Sue Ryder charity estimates, the hospice sector is actively saving the NHS £600 million a year by freeing up bed space or even avoiding hospital admissions in the first place. And the member for South Dorset gave some examples of exactly how that can work. So it does seem, from all this evidence that we've heard today, that the current model for hospice funding is increasingly unsustainable. Some have even used the word existential. Now, healthcare is devolved, and so it's not for the Scottish National Party to determine how the Secretary of State, the Minister or their shadows on the opposition benches prioritise their spending decision. But if the UK Government did find new or additional funding for the hospice sector in England, that would have consequences for the budget available to Scotland's Government. The current 2024-25 budget for Scotland does provide over £19.5 billion for NHS recovery, health and social care, and that is a real terms uplift despite the austerity that we're facing. And the Scottish Government has also established a new strategy steering group to oversee the development and delivery of a new palliative and end-of-life care strategy and associated work programmes. And that work aims to ensure that everyone in Scotland receives well-coordinated, timely and high-quality palliative care, care around death, and bereavement support based on their needs and preferences, and that can include support for families and carers. And we want to ensure that Scotland is a place where people and communities can come together to support each other, take action and talk openly about planning ahead, serious illness, dying, death and bereavement. There are other actions that the UK Government could take that would continue to help hospices across the islands. Energy costs remain stubbornly high, and yet the Government is bringing many of its energy support schemes to an end. As I said earlier, energy is a fixed cost for hospices, not an area where savings can readily be made. And the member for Darlington spoke about the situation of Ardgowan in Inverclyde. So many of the reforms to the energy market and energy price support that the SNP and others have called for would make a difference in turn to the hospice sector, as in many other parts of the economy and society. And regrettably, the Government's approach to immigration is having an impact. How many nurses and doctors and other specialists have arrived in the UK, maybe some of them on small boats or other irregular means, but are being denied the opportunity to work? How many more are not even coming in the first place now because the Government has decided that they can't bring family members, or it's massively increasing the costs and thresholds for visa applicants? How many might have come from Europe or might have stayed if it wasn't for Brexit? Every country in the world is having to face up to the legacy of COVID and the impact of the conflict in Ukraine and elsewhere, but the UK Government has been making deliberate policy choices in many of these areas that are exacerbating these challenges, not mitigating them, and the impact of that can have long-term consequences. If the hospice sector does have to make radical savings and scaling back of service provision, the costs of palliative care and supporting people at the end of life will still have to be met. They'll just have to be met elsewhere. That could mean increased costs for the NHS, increased costs for social services, or worse still, for individual families and households, not just in financial terms, but in emotional and psychological terms if they're denied that support at the end. People will always want to raise and give funds for hospices, but if we collectively want to rely on them to be there for individuals and families when they're needed most, we can't expect the hospice movement simply to rely on the goodwill and efforts of voluntary fundraisers. I think there's been a number of important suggestions that have been made during this debate, in the motion and in the evidence given by hospices themselves and the all-party group on how the government can put the sector on a more sustainable footing going forward. So I hope that the Minister, in the spirit of consensus that we've heard this evening, can respond positively, work with its counterparts across the United Kingdom and service providers to ensure that the sector gets the support it needs, so that everyone who works for hospices can focus on what they do best and continue to provide love and care to those who need it most at the end of their lives.
Shadow Minister Andrew Quinn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to respond to this debate. We've had a very thorough debate over the course of the past few hours, and I want to start by not only thanking the Backbench Business Committee for granting the time for us to debate this important issue, albeit a week later than most of us had expected, but also want to thank and congratulate the honourable members for Hastings and Rye and for Darlington for securing the debate, as well as for their contributions. I'd also like to add my thanks to my honourable friends, the member for Enfield Southgate, for Coventry North East, for Birmingham Erdington, for Hammersmith, for York Central, the Right Honourable friend for Hayes and Harlington, and the honourable member, my honourable friend, the member for Leeds East, and on the government benches, the members for Colchester, Southport, Eastleigh, Eddisbury, Basingstoke, North Devon, Bolton West, South Swindon, Loughborough, Isle of Wight, West Dorset, South Dorset, Waveney, St Austell and Newquay and Bracknell, and of course not forgetting the honourable gentleman, the member for Strangford too, and also the contribution of the honourable member for Glasgow North. And can I congratulate all of those that took part in the London Marathon? I wasn't one of them. But anyway, back to the subject that we're here to debate. End-of-life care is a subject which has touched the lives of most of us. It's a time where our loved ones and the family and friends that surround them can be at their most vulnerable and also in the need of the greatest support. Managed well, end-of-life care can be a healing time for families to come together, but managed badly, it can leave deep and traumatic scars. I need only look at the experience of my family and the experience I had during the deaths of my parents to know how this bears out. It was 30 years ago that I lost my mum to ovarian cancer. I was 19. Her final hours were spent at the end of an old Victorian ward with the curtain pulled around her, and she was in immense pain and suffering, which I remember vividly to this day, and was incredibly hard for our family to manage. But more recently, in 2022, I lost my dad following his own battle with cancer. Unlike my mum, he died at home, with my wife and I taking him in for the last few months of his life, supported by a superb army of care staff. In fact, when the time came for my dad to decide whether he wanted to go to the local hospice, Willowwood Hospice, or stay at home with us, his final words that he communicated to me and my wife was, "Stay here." And I think it comes to the point that the honourable gentleman, the member for Colchester, makes in how we talk about death, how we deal with death and end of life, and how for many people they want dignified end of life services at home, and we should do all we can to help facilitate that. And in my dad's case, the whole system worked. It came together in a way that I know from my own constituency casework it rarely does. But from the hospital, social services, Macmillan, Marie Curie, the GP, the pharmacy, the district nurses, and Willowwood Hospice, everything worked together seamlessly, and my dad passed away in comfort, peacefully, and surrounded by those who loved him most in the world. And I think that we've heard from the experiences of my honourable friend, the member for Coventry North East, and indeed of other members in the House today, of how we have to get that end-of-life choice right for people. And hospice at home plays an important role in that. Now, the sharp contrast between those two journeys emphasises to me in a deeply personal way just how impactful end-of-life care can be. Death is, for all of us, should be the choice that we want, and it should be, we should leave this planet with dignity. And we talk about the integrated care boards, and the clue is in the name. They should be integrated, both with social care but also with other services, including hospice services. And in my dad's case, that worked. But as we've heard from members across the House, in too many cases, that integration just isn't there yet. And the ICBs are not spending the money that the government has rightly devolved to them for a specific purpose, not being spent as we would want it to be. Now, hospices play such an important part in that deeply personal journey for hundreds of thousands of people and their families every year right across the country. Working in partnership with existing local systems, hospices ensure people receive the care that is most appropriate to them, considering all their needs. And I want to pay particular tribute to one of my local hospices, Willowood Hospice in Ashton, Tameside. The tireless work and dedication of their staff was a vital support when caring for my dad in his final days. They showed hospice care at its best, and they have my immense gratitude for all they continue to do. But they, like so many others, find themselves in a perilous financial position. Willowood faces a structural deficit of £750,000 this financial year. Without finding a way to plug this gap, their services will have to be reduced. And there is real pressure on all hospices to generate their own income, with Hospice UK estimating that as much as 2/3 of income for adult hospices is generated through fundraising, with some like Willowood having to raise 80% of their funds themselves. Many hospices do incredible fundraising work, with armies of volunteers finding ever more hostile economic climate
see what's happening?
Finding themselves in, including from energy costs, which obviously the House can't now afford. Funds are being squeezed more than ever. The sector as a whole is on track for a deficit of £77 million for the last financial year, the worst figures for 2 decades. As a result, hospices are starting to pare back some of their services. But as we've heard, there is also a legal requirement placed on integrated care boards by the Health and Care Act to commission palliative care services in keeping with local need. And we need to make sure that that funding is passported down to the hospices where they need it. We know that there is far from consistent delivery, leaving patients in some parts of the country without adequate services in their own community. And the clear pressure on the sector shows no sign of letting up, because we are an ageing population. The demand on hospice services is set to increase further, with ONS data suggesting a further 130,000 people will die each year in the UK by 2040. So in closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is clear that what we need is proper, joined-up, supportive policies for the hospice sector. We need to ensure that the money that government has ensured is there for the hospice sector gets down to where they need it at the hospices themselves. We need to focus on creating a health and care system that is genuinely joined up and has end of life as part of the health policies, the health and well-being policies for each and every one of us. It can no longer be the taboo subject it once was, and the hospice sector underpins that so many care pathways that have a tangibly positive impact on patients and their families' end of life matters. So I want to say that this current government will have our support in ensuring the hospice sector is protected and is supported.
Minister. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to start by thanking my honourable friends for Hastings and Rye and for Darlington for securing this debate. The number of speeches this evening reflects the strength of feeling and indeed the support for hospices across the country. As the Minister with oversight of end-of-life care, I share the passion of many honourable members for hospices and for what they do caring for people towards and at the end of life, providing respite for carers and supporting families both before and after the death of a loved one. Many honourable members have rightly praised the work of hospices who serve their constituents and made special mention of the extraordinary work of hospices for children and young people. I'd also like to thank hospices for all they do, for all they're doing right now, as their work and the work of hospice staff is around the clock. Beyond that, I'd like to thank everyone who gives palliative and end-of-life care as part of hospice teams, but also working in the NHS. How you die, how your loved ones die, or in fact, how you live towards the end of your life matters. As the Honourable Member for Birmingham, Erdington said so eloquently earlier this evening, and all of us here this evening know this. That's why palliative and end-of-life care matters, both when that care is provided by the NHS, as it is for the majority of people, and when it is provided by hospices. And I do want to emphasise this point, because sometimes there is a misunderstanding here, and I have heard it a few times this evening. The fact is, most palliative and end-of-life care is provided by the NHS, whether that's in hospitals, by primary care and by community trusts. Alongside and in addition, hospices do the wonderful work that they do. Recognising the importance of palliative and end-of-life care, we specified in the Health and Care Act 2022 that integrated care boards must commission these services to meet the needs of their populations. Some honourable members have argued this evening for the funding for hospices to be centralised, so taken away from those integrated care boards and allocated, I assume, either by NHS England or the Department for Health and Social Care. Now, while I understand the motivation of honourable members calling for this, I don't agree. We set up ICBs purposefully to understand the healthcare needs of our local communities and to plan and commission services to meet those needs, and in so doing to reduce health disparities. Our communities and their needs and the services they already have in place are different, and rarely is a one-size-fits-all answer made in Westminster the right answer. Given that, I stand by a more localised approach, though with that there is, of course, variation. Another source of variation is historic. The hospice movement has grown organically. The location of hospices has not been planned to meet demographic need, for instance. Therefore, there are inequalities in access to hospice services, especially for those living in rural and more deprived areas. This variation in access to hospice care has to be taken into account by ICBs in the decisions they must make to ensure that people have access to end-of-life care if they don't live within an area served by hospice, as well as those who do. I am happy to give way to
grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and she makes a really important point about the holistic nature with which our hospices have developed and emerged. Is it not the case, and would she not agree with me, that our ICBs have the opportunity to, in fact, use our hospices as a means of addressing those shortfalls in certain communities, directing funding specifically to them to meet needs that hasn't been met before? And would she further clarify for me one small point? She's made a clear distinction between NHS provided care and hospice care, but there is many cases around the country where the NHS is funding in full or in part specific services in hospices. And so on that particular point, would she distinguish between, how would she distinguish that? Is that NHS care or is that hospice care if it's been fully commissioned and fully funded by the NHS?
I'll pick up a few of those points. To the point about me speaking about the NHS providing palliative and end-of-life care, I was particularly trying to address what I've heard in some speeches this evening on other occasions, which is a misunderstanding where people think that all end-of-life care and palliative care is provided by hospices. It is more mixed than that. You get a combination. You do indeed get integrated care boards commissioning hospices to provide care. You get hospices providing care independently, directly, and you get NHS services doing so, and you get these teams working together as well, very collaboratively, and actually that diversity is a strength. Sometimes to address inequalities, indeed, ICBs can look to hospices to do more, for instance, in underserved areas. At other times, it may be more appropriate for them to look to NHS services. It will vary by area, and that is why one of the reasons why these decisions should be localised rather than somebody sitting in my place trying to say this is how it should be done across the whole country. So, as I've said, while I don't agree with centralising hospice funding, what I do agree with, and in fact I am working on, is transparency and accountability of ICBs to their communities and to honourable members as representatives. That's why I have regular meetings with NHS England leads on palliative and end-of-life care. That is why I'm pleased to have secured NHS England's commitment to including palliative and end-of-life care in the set of topics which are discussed in regular performance meetings that NHS England has with ICBs. And that is why I'm pushing NHS England and ICBs to improve the data they collect on access to and quality of palliative and end-of-life care. Currently, NHS England has developed a palliative and end-of-life care dashboard of data to help ICBs understand the needs of their populations and then address and track inequalities in access to end-of-life care. This is progress, but I want this transparency to go further so we all have the data we need to assure ourselves that our ICBs are commissioning the care that our constituents need. I've heard the calls for more funding for hospices, alongside stories of some fantastic fundraising efforts, from the Star Trek Night Walk and the Santa Sprint to magnificent marathon runners who have joined us in the chamber tonight, fresh from the London Marathon yesterday. Congratulations to those who have done that, particularly on behalf of hospices. Very timely for this debate. That said, I disagree with the honourable member who said that people running the marathon for hospices is sad. It is not. It is a wonderful thing. It is a sign of the tremendous support that hospices have in our communities. It's a sign that people are willing to choose to fund hospices, not just when the taxman comes along, but actually choosing that they want to have a hospice providing services to people in their area. And it's a good thing, because this fundraising gives hospices an independent funding stream and the freedom that goes with that to serve their communities as they say fit, and together with that, really strong ties with their communities and all those people who do fundraise for their hospices. Yes, I have to do that.
Friend, she is so very right. In my constituency of Eastbourne, for St Wilfrid's Hospice, people aren't just prepared to run, they'll walk over coals. Would she congratulate them and their outstanding work?
Yes, I would congratulate all fundraising efforts. I do hope their feet are all right. As honourable members know, we in government has provided dedicated additional funding to hospices. In the pandemic, which I played a part in myself, helping them with energy bills and the Children's Hospice Grant, which the NHS has confirmed will go to hospices for this financial year too. Now, looking ahead, I fully appreciate the ask for longer-term certainty of funding. Of course, I understand that. However, funding for hospices, end-of-life care and many other things beyond the current financial year depend on a future spending review. And I am sure all honourable members can understand that I cannot preempt a future spending review, and ICBs similarly will not know their funding until that spending review. So while committing funding beyond the spending review period is not in my power, what I am pushing for is for our healthcare system to encourage and enable more advanced planning by individuals, to consider and set out what you want at the end of your life. Inevitably, some of us will die in hospital, and for some of us that is the right place. But given the choice, many people would rather die at home. So setting out a plan that includes your preference of place of death and indeed what sort of treatments you do or don't want is something we should all, in fact, be doing. And as my right honourable friend for, I've said for Buckland, Swindon, said... sorry. And my honourable friend and fabulous health colleague, the MP for Colchester, we should talk more about death and plan for it. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, there aren't easy answers to the questions raised this evening. There rarely are. I don't have a pot of money otherwise going unspent for hospices, nor do ICBs or NHS England, but I will continue what I do, working with NHS England to make sure palliative and end-of-life care is given the attention it deserves and needs, is considered important, just as we consider services which prolong life important, and that the NHS is held to account for doing that. I will continue to agree with honourable members on the importance of hospices and the important work they do. I see this as a minister, as a constituency MP, and from my own family. I will never forget saying goodbye to my grandmother in a hospice near Yeovil, and I will always be grateful. Thank you.
Sally on Hart to wind up.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank the members of the Backbench Business Committee for granting this important debate in this House, and to all the members who spoke today, and to Hospice UK for their dedicated work and support. And I'd especially like to thank St Michael's Hospice and Demelza, their staff and all the volunteers, as well as local people for their donations and fundraising, especially during challenging economic times. And I'd like to thank my honourable friend for Darlington for all his long-standing hard work and advocacy on behalf of hospices and end-of-life care. Members from across the House have spoken collectively on this important issue. There is so much passion for our hospices and consensus which shows that the funding of hospices, palliative and end-of-life care is not a political issue. The government does financially support hospices through ICBs, but funding models also require closer consideration, ensuring parity with the NHS whilst maintaining hospices' independence and flexibility. The Minister has heard many similar themes, mainly surrounding certainty of funding and on a sustainable basis, and better collaboration between ICBs, NHS and hospices, and I thank her for her work and her consideration and listening to this debate. Extra government funding via ICBs can improve a localised approach, and we all call for funding to be included, for more funding to be included in the spending review.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion number 9, relating to business of the House today. Number 2, Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order.